policy implementation framework, and this is the strategy for implementing it. We think in short terms. We often don't think about, where will Nigeria be in 20 years' time? Where would it be in 30 years' time? And how would the growth of our population have affected that? There is duplication of a lot of initiatives and programs. So think about issues of youth, for instance. You've got a Ministry of Youth and Sports that is focusing on issues of youth. You've got a Ministry of Women Affairs that is supposedly also focusing on issues of youth. You've got a Ministry of, a Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs that is focusing on issues of youth. You've got a Ministry of Education. You've got Ministry of Health. I can go on and on. You've got various agencies and parastatals, SMED are saying they are working on issues of youth. You've got even the central bank trying to intervene on youth issues. All of these people falling over themselves, no clear strategy, no coordination, no clear end results that they're aiming for. So this is the kind of chaos that we're dealing with. We're dissipating funds, dissipating efforts with no tangible results on the horizon. So what are we going to do with all this youth that we keep giving birth to? And the World Development Report, I think it's let me just check, it's the 2019 one, already started talking about the changing nature of work. And this is the quote you can see there is from the World Economic Forum. It's actually quite striking that by the year 2030, which is what, in a little over 21 years, 80% of Africa's working population will one day work in positions that do not exist. Did I say 21 years? No, we're in 2021, entering 2022. So in a little over 9 years, actually, the World Economic Forum is saying that 80% of Africa's working age population will one day work in positions that do not exist today. So what does that mean then for the kinds of skills that people need to have, for the kinds of jobs that need to exist? And how do we bridge the gap between those jobs that exist in the future and the skills that we're equipping our youth with today? Because in 9 years' time, the people who are going to be competing for these jobs are in secondary school today. They're going to be entering universities in the next, 4 or 5 years, coming out of university around the 2029, 2030 mark to compete for jobs that don't exist today as we know it. Frightening prospect, isn't it? So what does a future-ready Africa need? And this is what I say to my children. I say to them, there's no reason why you don't make a first class, because every single exam question has been answered on Google. And so when I was asked to speak about this topic, which is a future-ready Africa, is a skilled Africa, I immediately went to Google, and guess what I found? I found an article on what does a future-ready Africa need. So imagine if I'd been given these assignments to write as an undergraduate. Is there any reason why I shouldn't make an A or get a first class? Anyway, that's my excuse for making only a 2-2 while I was in university. But anyway, this article suggests 5 things. So there's a need to invest in education. There's a need to invest in trade and start to move away from aid. There's a need to industrialize again, both hard and soft industrialization. And those of us that discovered oil and abandoned industries need to go back to industrialization, both traditional and smart industrialization. We need to build digital skills and fluency in digital skills, and we need to promote lifelong learning. That's what the article is suggesting a future-ready Africa needs. But when we talk about a future-ready Africa, I'm thinking, well, if the overwhelming majority of your population is young, then it seems to me that your future is already here, and that the issue is one that requires urgency, because we're not talking about, oh, majority of our population is going to be young by 2030. No, majority of our population is already young. We're already battling the issues. We're already needing to think about how to keep our youth gainfully engaged. The NSAS protests of a year ago, again, gave us an inclination that the youth, they may not be as organized as they could be. They may not be as experienced in managing change as they need to be, but they recognize that things need to change. They recognize that the governance that we have, that the politics that we have is not fit for purpose, and something needs to change. And I think it's only a matter of time before the process that will lead to that systemic change is properly articulated and pursued. So our future is already here, is my overall statement. So what then do we need to do? I wrote an article together with 2 colleagues of mine in Sahara Reporters some time ago. I think this was in 2019, where we're talking about, despite all of the challenges, there are 4 reasons for optimism with regards to economic inclusion, because a lot of our young people are actually outside the economic activity sphere. And we're saying, okay, but given all of that, there is some room for optimism. So you have young people who have been forged by adversity. And when you're forged by adversity, you find a way to survive. You find a way to, you find a way to make a living. And when I talk about being forged by adversity, I'm talking about a group of people who have grown up, never seen a country really work. At least some of us, when we grew up at a time when you knew if you got an education in Nigeria, you can compete with anybody in the world. Some of us had lecturers from Oxford and Cambridge come to teach us when they were on sabbatical. Some of us could travel by road to Maiduguri and back without worrying about security, sometimes even by train. So we've seen some semblance of a working country, but many of our young people have not. All they know is that they have to generate their own electricity, they have to pay for their own security, they have to pay for their own education if they want a decent education, or get their parents to do so. So, but being forged by adversity also gives you potential, because it then means that you can survive in virtually every environment. So that's a reason for optimism, even though it's a source of difficulty. Then there are digital dividends. Many of our young people today are making a living just using their mobile phones. Many are trading on Instagram. Many are doing business on Twitter, and I hope that the government lifts the ban on Twitter very soon. So a lot of people are not sitting around carrying applications from office to office. They're actually finding a way to survive using just their mobile phones. Well, there's a move to improve digital identity, which I'm supporting the government to do, because there's evidence, very clear evidence, that the more people have some sort of identity, the more they are able to earn, and the greater the growth of the economy. We've seen some movement in mobile money. We came late to it because Nigeria basically undertook a wrong policy initiative of focusing its economic inclusion activities on the banks. So it was telling banks, oh, okay, every bank must go open a branch in all the 36 states and all of that kind of stuff. The banks, pretended to comply. Very, very different from when digital inclusion is run through telecommunication companies, telcos, like it happened in Kenya, where everybody uses M-Pesa. You can use M-Pesa to pay your baba. You can use it to buy meat in the market. And so a lot more people have been included in the economy that way. I'm hoping that the central bank will continue to ease the strictures that are currently around mobile money. And finally, we are now working from home, and that presents the new normal. In DAI, we currently have at least 3 members of staff who actually work for our US office, but are based in Nigeria. So they go into our Lagos office, they work out of here, but their office is actually in the US. I have another one that will shortly be joining our office in the UK, again, working out of Nigeria. So this presents an opportunity. The whole of the pandemic and working at home and sit at home and lockdowns, again, has presented a new vista where young people can now get jobs abroad, very well paid jobs abroad, without needing to worry about visa and having to travel. There is, of course, a skills gap, and the picture you're seeing is with regards to cybersecurity, just as an example. Rising threats, very few professionals who can do those jobs. Again, you have the problem of our universities and colleges churning out graduates who are not equipped for what the market requires. So there's a need to develop a number of skills. There's a need for analytical skills. These are things that the market requires. The market doesn't need you to be able to cram a topic and repeat it. Nobody wants that, because like I said, you can Google anything. You can Google virtually anything you want to know. I was asking people the other day to teach me Excel in 1 hour, and everybody referred me to YouTube. Just go watch a YouTube video, and everything you want to learn about Excel, you can learn in 30 minutes. So this idea of you need to cram it and reproduce it is no longer what the market requires. So people need analytical skills, people need technical skills, people need digital skills, and a lot of our people are developing those digital skills, learning how to code, learning how to specializing in cybersecurity and many other things. But importantly, we need to learn behavioral skills, because when you have a country that has basically let you down, you are almost permanently angry, and you see everybody from a generation before you as the enemy. But there's a Paul Simon, there's a Paul Gabriel song that says that every generation blames the one before, and so already the TikTok generation are already blaming the Twitter and Instagram generation for not having done enough to try and change the country, just like the Twitter and Instagram generation are blaming the Facebook generation for not challenging those that have been there since the 1960s. But all of these things mean that people need to learn behavioral skills. You need to be able to put across your point without resorting to insults, without abusing somebody's mother. You don't need to start every response with an attack. You can actually just make your point, listen to the other person's point and say, interesting point, but here is what I think. So that behavioral skill needs to be developed. People also need to develop their capability for leadership. So it's not enough to just be able to start your own business as an entrepreneur. You also need to know how to lead. Otherwise, that business will not last very long. As a society, we need to encourage internships. We need to encourage student work placements. Most people I know, most young people I know these days are getting their jobs by doing internships first, and then finding their way into the organization from there. We need to encourage entrepreneurship in a systematic way, not in the scattergun ad hoc approach that government is currently employing. We need greater town and gown links. So our universities need to be researching things that are relevant to the market, and the market needs to be endowing chairs in universities to study things that are of interest to the market. And we need to look at our curricula to make sure that they are future ready, and we need to invest more in education than we have in the past. Finally, again, I wrote an article for EDPM. I think it's the European Center for Development and Policy Management. And it's titled, When Money Finishes, People Remain, the Challenges of Youth Unemployment in Nigeria. And the backstory around this was that a gentleman called Bisi Oguyemi was in Yaba, and a young man came to beg him for money. And that must have been the 10th person that came to beg him for money that day. And he said, look, I don't have any money. And the young man said to him, remember, when money finishes, it is people that remain. And Mr. Ogunwale wasn't sure what exactly it meant. Did it mean that you should be kind to people because one day, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, one day, when the poor have nothing to eat, they will eat the rich. Is that what this guy meant by when money finishes, it is people that will remain? Or is he advising him that, look, many rich people, when alarm blows, if you've been a nice rich man, it's actually the young people that you've looked after in the area that will say, no, this one is not among them. This is a nice rich man, let's not attack him. Or does it mean that we need to focus on youth development? We need to focus not just on acquiring wealth, but on investing in our youth, investing in our education. What exactly does it mean when somebody says to you, when money finishes, it is people that remains? I'll leave you to make up your mind about that meaning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joaba. This indeed has been a very insightful session and insightful talk. But before we let you go, sir, we just want to ask, because I mean, can you hear me, Dr. Joe?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, great. And apologies for the audio earlier. Since we have in the room today, permit me to add the newspaper generation to the list that you gave. We have people that fall in the category of the TikTok generation down to the newspaper generation. And obviously the people who are in the room are those who are on the same page with each and every, with both of us, knowing that there is need to look at this, what we call the future skill, as a present day skill that we need to address the future of Africa, and then in connection with the youth. What advice do you have for the people who are in the room today. Especially, let's take it from the analogy you gave about the TikTok generation blaming the Twitter and the Instagram generation, and those ones in turn blaming the Facebook generation, and if you permit me to add, the Facebook generation blaming the newspaper generation. What advice do you have for these people? Because we all fall into these categories and we are here today.
I think we need to look at each level, because there's a need for government to first of all recognize the problem that we have, because like I said in my statement, our future is already here, actually. And government needs to recognize that, and recognize that, look, it cannot be business as usual. That's the first thing. The second thing is that as parents, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to equip our children. And so, my daughter, who has finished university, finished A-levels, and is now working, actually started working when she was in the first year of university. So every summer she was doing an internship in one place or the other. So by the time she was graduating, she has 4 years experience, not 4 continuous years experience, but she's been working for at least 4 years, which gave her an edge over her over her peers. Then you have the need for the individual to take responsibility to improve themselves, because there are free courses on virtually everything. There are free courses on Coursera, there are free courses on everything else. And again, I give my daughter as an example. At the time she was expecting, she was on leave and expecting, she actually did 2 Harvard courses online while she was waiting to give birth. So these are all the things that give you an edge over everybody else. Yes, you can blame the generation before you, and in many cases that blame is justified. That blame is justified in very many cases. But then after then what? Then what happens? So there's a need for everyone at every level to understand what they can contribute to the future of Africa. And I've already talked about the private sector and industry, again, ensuring that universities and colleges are supported to produce the kind of graduates that will be useful to them. And also the universities and training institutions need to look at the market and ensure that the curriculum fits the market. You'll agree with me that if you look at the success of companies like Andela, it is because people are graduating in universities with a degree in computer science without actually being able to code, without being able to do anything practical in terms of computing. And so Andela set up a school where it teaches people how to code very quickly, and was then getting them very good jobs in reputable organizations. There's no reason why our computer science faculties cannot do that and make sure that the people that they're producing are fit for the market. So I don't have one specific advice for one person. It's a whole of society thing, and different parts of society need to do their bits to ensure that we can accelerate our future, which we already have today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Job. The last thing that you just said, it's interesting that one of our speakers yesterday mentioned the same thing, and Dr. Tunji Adebeson, and what he said was that he spoke about the need for there to be a handshake between the education and the industry. You have spoken about that handshake as well. There's nothing wrong, there's nothing stopping the private sector from even sponsoring certain research areas that is relevant to the market of today, because that is also what then brings those who are within the education sector to understand and to even keep up with the rapidly growing world that we are in today. But thank you very much, sir. We are really happy to have had you this morning. Thank you for your time. Please, can we all just, if whatever, for the rest of us that are in the room, whatever you have gotten from them, I know that a lot of things have been said, comments in the section. Please just post some of the things that you have learned, some things that I'm sure Dr. Drew would love to see some of the comments that are in the chat box. But thank you very much. Please, wherever you are, you can just give Dr. Drew a round of applause whilst we move on to the next session for today. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, very quickly, we'll move on to our first plenary for today. Today has started off on a very high note. And it is interesting that we then have this session that is coming up now, because this plenary is focused on education management, then, now, and the future. We're talking of the past, the present, and the future. And the session will be moderated by somebody who has done a lot of work in the education space in such a short time. He's someone that has been able to, he's someone that is currently the founder of Sharing Life Africa, a non-profit that is creating access to quality education for children living in underserved communities. He's also a MasterCard Foundation scholar and an alumnus of Teach for Nigeria. And for some of us, we might have heard about him, and very recently, even from the platform or from the Instagram account of the Vice President of Nigeria. His name is Mr. Henry Anumudu. Please, can we give him a round of applause as he comes on to lead us in the next plenary session?
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. Really appreciate it. And welcome everyone to the first plenary for the day of the Nedis Education Innovation Summit. We'll be joined by a stellar panel comprising of Dr. Abimbola Banu Ogundere, the CEO of the Kids God School. We'll also be joined by Dr. John Mugo, Executive Director of Zizi Afrique. And we'll also be joined by Mr. Onlarewaju, the CEO of Imperial Education Services. My name is Henry Anumudu, as introduced already. And I'm joining you from Edinburgh. That's why you see me wearing something that looks a little bit heavy. Today, our panelists will be speaking on education management, then, now, the future. And they'll be leaning into the question of how we can cultivate school leadership, how we can bring resources together, whether human resources or material resources, and also how we can build partnership, whether with the government or within the private sector, to ensure that our education systems, our education institutions can deliver on its promises for our communities, and especially for our young people, as just shared by Dr. Joe Abba. So, but I think it's important to, take a pause and, reflect a little bit on the context of this entire conversation. And that is, you would, of course, everyone experienced this, that early 2020, we had the shutdown caused by the pandemic across the world. And, Africa was mostly hit by this economically, educationally, just across all systems. So it is upon this context that we'll be having our conversations today. So just a note to all our audience and our delegates, please, while we have the conversation, you can drop your questions in the chat box. I'll do my very best to ensure I attend to all these questions and bring them up to the panelists to answer. And before we begin, I would also love each of the panelists to take 1-2 minutes to make a better introduction of themselves and their work. So we'll start with Dr. Abimbola Ogundere. Please.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, participants. Good morning, facilitators. Good morning, the organizing committee of Nedis 2021. My name is Dr. Abimbola Ogundere, and I'm the CEO of the Kids Court School, the Court Hill College, and the Learning as I Teach Foundation. It's great to be here having these conversations. I'm a key or core supporter of having important conversations. So thank you, Nedis, for having me. And hello, Henry, and everyone else, Mr. John and Mr. Larry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abimbola. When I was preparing for this, I'm like, how do we introduce Dr. Abimbola? She does a lot of things at the same time. So please, Dr. John, can you introduce yourself? 1-2 minutes.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I'm connecting from Nairobi, Kenya, and I wish to thank the Nedis organizing team and Dr. Mo Adefeso, who I know very well. And I think this is a great time to be talking about this. It is timely. I work at Dizzy Afrique, and my work since 2017 is around youth and the skills that are needed for the future and present, and connecting what especially TVET does in producing the skills that are needed by employers now, but also looking into the near future. I look forward to engaging. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. John. Mr. Larry, please, can you introduce yourself?
Right. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Larry Ogundipe. I'm the CEO and founder of Imperial EdTech. We used to be Imperial Educational Services, but we're now Imperial EdTech. So thank you very much once again for having me, Dr. Mo, and the rest of the team, my fellow panelists as well. So I've been in the educational sector for 11 years, and we've been doing a lot of work silently. And I think now we don't have a choice but to be sitting in the forefront of these conversations, because I think it's high time we stop working in silos and we start to have this conversation and start to drive things collaboratively. So I'm excited to be here, and I think I have my 2 cents that I'll be adding as we go forward. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introductions, and we'll dive right into the questions. Again, we are discussing education management, then, now, and the future. So my first question would go straight to Dr. Abimbola Ogundere. COVID-19 is a global crisis, right? And that's the context of our conversation today. And it has changed education and economic systems globally, both within Nigeria, across Africa. But we have for a long time actually been in crisis mode. If we reflect on it, whether in response to school access, whether in response to the crisis of quality education within our schools, whether in response to teacher professional development, you can name it. Or even the skills gap as discussed today. So many people also reflect on this again and again, that the pandemic only revealed what was always present. Dr. Ogundere, in your various roles, right, over the past 12 years in education, you have worked especially to prepare our education systems to respond to these very problems. So I think you are well positioned to answer these questions. How can we support the management of our institutions, including vocational and innovation enterprises, to respond to the crisis we are in and have always been in, especially right now, the crisis of the skills gap and decent work for young people? Please.
Thank you, Henry. Great question. When I reflect on that question, what comes to me is how, when we're growing up, there was this, I don't know if it was a Christian song, but it's a song that comes to my mind. when he says, don't build your house on the sandy land. I don't know, does anybody know that song, right? So I think that what has happened with us is, in Nigeria and maybe across the African continent, is that our education system is not deeply rooted, right? It's not deeply rooted. So storms are going to come, storms are going to come, things are going to happen. I love you said that, if it's not a problem of access today or teacher development, teacher preparedness, funding, right, gaps in the curriculum, inappropriate curriculum and all that, it's COVID, it's crisis. I think a couple of years ago, there was also the Ebola crisis. There would always be something. But I think that if we look at our education system and say, how do we ensure that it is well-grounded, that it is well-rooted, it has deep roots, right? Then things are going to come and then it will shake us so much, right? So, that is the analogy that I want to use to address this. So, globally, if you look at what education management is, it says that, combining human resource, material resources to supervise, plan, strategize, implement structures, right, to evaluate, execute an education system. So if we look at that and we see what is happening right now, now using Nigeria in context, where, there are 10.5 billion out of school, children. We have 28 to 40% out of school rates. The literacy rates are 62. Nearly half of the children who have, half of the children who actually attend school, right, who actually complete their primary education can't read, right, a complete sentence, right? More than 2/3 of the children in the North remain illiterate. So we understand that obviously something is wrong. I can keep on reading out the figures, So something is wrong. And that is why when that foundation is there of these things that are shaky, when a storm comes, again, threatens to, throw us away. So if I were to figure, if I was going to answer that question in terms of what needs to be done, the first thing I would say, and I'll say this really briefly, is that we as Nigerians need to sit down and across the African continent and say, what does education mean to us? What is the purpose of education, right? You know that the British curriculum, the Nigerian curriculum seems to be fashioned, after the British curriculum at the time when, we were being colonized and all that. That was many, many years ago. Right now, what does the society demand of education, right? Is our education fit for purpose, right? What is the big why? What is the national agenda for education? What do we want education to do for us as Nigerians, right? Or as Africans? Then we go outside there and say, okay, you know what? It needs to be a multi-sectorial approach. What we find out is that it's just the educators trying to solve their own problems. As an educator, obviously there are no funds, about maybe 7-point-something% of the national budget is on education. So we, go to the banks, we try to get funding. We don't get funding. How is it that we are going to deploy or deliver or provide qualitative education when there are no funds, right? So if the people in the financial sector, for example, see that themselves as partners, if people in the tech industry see themselves as partners and say there's a big agenda, right, for the products of the education system in Africa, right, and all of us are coming together to deliver this. There's a mandate. We are coming together to deliver it. So we are not working. So when something happens, it's not just happening to the education sector. The schools have closed. The children are out of school. Everybody's affected because we know that we have joint responsibility. So there needs to be that joint responsibility, right, to delivering the education that our people really need. Now, the third thing is obviously all stakeholders must be involved. So now we pay lip service to the involvement. And I'll give you an example of how, I'm not going to name names, but how you have a private education system again, I'm going to use Nigeria as an example, that is not properly, properly monitored or evaluated, right? Everybody is doing their own thing. So you go into one school, it's the British curriculum. This school is an American curriculum. This one is a Finnish curriculum. This one is an Indian curriculum. Everybody their own. How is it that we're in Nigeria and there is no Nigerian approach, a Nigerian system, a Nigerian way of doing things? So now the schools are there. What is the money? How are we monitoring and evaluating? So all stakeholders, from the government to the ministries of education, to the statutory bodies, to the education agencies, to the schools, to the teachers, we all must come down and say, we're working together. So it is not parents against students. It is not government against a school. It is not, the school against the government. It is everybody saying together, that collaborative approach is very imperative. The next, obviously, is the funds. You cannot run a system that is ill-funded. It would not have roots. There are certain things that should happen. For example, you go into a typical, classroom in the public sector, and then there are 100, students and one teacher, or 300 students and one teacher, right? So we don't have enough schools, we don't have enough teachers, we don't have enough facility, we don't have, enough, everything. You go into a school, somebody, I think Dr. Joaba said it, that, the mandate of a company is that they know that when they come out of the university after computer science, they have never touched a computer. They have never touched a computer. So what that company saw is that they saw the gap that existed and said, let's plug into it. And it's a big, I think it's Andela, a big company now. How would it be that a student is going to go through the university and come out of the university and is as a computer science graduate, and then, it's just a bit of, right? Now, let me just quickly go on to the teacher quality and professionalism. We need to go back into the colleges of education and the faculties of education and look at the quality of education that they are receiving. You cannot fill from an empty cup. We're saying that we need to develop skills. The children need analytical skills, they need technical skills, they need digital skills. Do the teachers have these skills? Who is going to teach them these skills? Teach them these skills. So the teachers don't have these skills. So it's beyond just saying, okay, I've employed a teacher. Okay, and then guess what? Go and teach creativity. How? Who taught me creativity? Are we not then backing up the wrong tree, asking a fish to begin to, to run like a dog? What is happening? So the teacher quality, right, reskilling the teachers at that level, for me, obviously, accountability, monitoring and evaluation of the system, ensuring quality, right? No, you can't go into a place as a monitoring person and somebody gives you, 100,000 naira and they just sign their papers and that's that. And then maybe months later, we hear that bad things are happening in that organization. That is not going to be, good enough, right? And of course, last but not the least, data. There's data. Now data is king. We need that information. We need to know, why before we can make the next steps. Can our steps be data informed in any way, right? Can our steps be data informed? Can the system be data driven? If you're going to ask, okay, what is the number of the students that, we were not even collecting the data, we're not keeping the data. So for me, if you look at, this is just 7, probably not even, there's a word for it. But if we're looking at how we would get to the point where, of course, leadership is important. I'm sure I've mentioned that, right? Sometimes putting the square pegs in the square holes is imperative, which is something that we haven't done a lot of, right? Until maybe quite recently. When the Honorable Commissioner, Mrs. Adefisayo, was put there, everybody clapped because before then, it would be someone who was maybe a media, someone would say, okay, so this is a media specialist, you are now the Commissioner of Education. So that is what we have run. Are we sure we are putting people who know what to do, right, in the system, right, to lead the system? So, I've not scratched the surface, but I'm saying that if we want an education system that is even working now, forget about the future. The education system is not working now. And I loved it when Dr. Joaba said that, the future is now. The future is now. Forget about this 2030, 2050, 20. Now, as we're speaking, what is the quality? What is the foundation? What is it that we have? What are we building our house upon? Is it sand? Is it rock? What exactly are we building a house? So I think those are the things that we can begin to think about. Thank you, Henry.
That's an amazing reflection, Dr. Abimbola. When you were speaking, I remember at Teach for Nigeria, we always use this idea of the jigsaw puzzle, to discuss, the problem, especially in education. And I think it applies directly here, that it's not just a one system kind of approach. It's, you have to come from various angles to solve that problem. And I think you just, clearly articulated that here. I'll get back to you to, ask some questions there, but let's move on to Mr. Lanre Ogundipe. Sir, in your, clearly you are a huge advocate for education for all, especially across Nigeria and also within Africa itself. And through to this, you have implemented various education programs in partnership with the federal government of Nigeria. You've done work in partnership with the Lagos state government, even multinationally with the UNDP as well. So you clearly appreciate and recognize the role government play in our work of building better systems. So the question is, in your opinion, what do you think are the major considerations we must have in mind towards strengthening the public-private partnerships that will realize, some of the important ideas addressed by Dr. Ogundere, or some of to realize some of the aims of our education institutions, both in Nigeria and Africa?
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, again, once again. Right. So I would start with what Dr. Abimbola said in terms of collaboration, right? Public-private partnership. If we look at majority of us probably on this call, probably send our kids to private schools, right? That's because we expect a certain standard of delivery, of educational delivery for our kids. But when we do that knowing that we're expecting a certain outcome from our kids, right? But the fact that we're in this education fight, right? As yesterday, Dr. TJ said, I think he called it the education dragon or the education demon, that we're fighting. So why is it being called that? It's being called that because, there is a very huge distinction between the private schools and the public schools now. I was saying to someone yesterday that I think we have to grow backwards, unfortunately, as a country, because when we look at everything that has happened, right, every attempt and effort for us to build forward has kind of fell on its face. But if we build backwards, going back to the days where private school was not an option, it wasn't there. The public school sector was great. They were churning out great lecturers, great doctors. The federal government was sending out people to universities abroad on scholarships. Those people came back to build this economy, and a lot of things that have happened, right? And that some of these people in some of the newer generations never knew a good Nigeria, right? So let's go back to where a good Nigeria started from and what happened in that period, and what happened now, what changed, right? Because it's the same country, and those stories can be told by people that are still alive today, right? So now that collaboration in terms of how do we build backwards? So let's go back and then build the future, right? So that's why I like the idea of then, now, and the future. That's the first thing. The second thing is about funding. Unfortunately, there's something that I always say: if you fund a dysfunction, it only becomes a well-funded dysfunction, right? And if we do not structure this whole education system properly, collaboratively within the private and the public sector, we're building a house, that has no foundation, right? So that's why we have to go back to the foundation of the past. Like, what did they do right? Because they have built something that has worked, right? So now when we go into international collaboration, so we have an effort that we're driving now around cross-border education, and also looking at systems in places like Europe, such as the Erasmus system, because we're very big on higher ed and even on K-12 as well. So our K-12 drive is mostly around STEM education and STEAM education, and seeing how we drive that into the day-to-day livelihood and life of human beings, because a lot of people still think STEAM is a subject-related thing. They still believe, and it's not. It's a way of life, right? It's a way that you collaborate all your subjects to become, who you are, to form the person that you are as a human being. And like Dr. Abimbola said, we need to start teaching, letting our teachers understand, because when we talk about STEM and STEM education, a lot of people still look at it as a subject or as a, I mean, I'm lucky to be on the board of STEM Up Lagos, led by the SSA to the governor, the nucleus board of STEM Up Lagos. And if you've seen some of the things we've been doing with STEM Up Lagos, it's been around really ensuring that students actually understand that this is not just a subject, but it's a way of life. So even if you're a science student, you're a commercial student, you're an art student, you still need STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, because it informs a lot of decisions that you make, as a human being, as a child, as a youth, and even as an adult, right? Now, the third thing I would like to mention is how do we build these systems? We've seen private schools work effectively, right? What are private schools doing that the public schools are not doing? A lot of governors and leaders come out to say, oh, we're giving out the biggest budget to education and all of that. That's beautiful. That's lovely to hear. But where does that money really go? How do we track how those funds are being spent? I mean, we know of people that are building classrooms for 200 million naira, 300 million naira for a block of classrooms. I mean, we've heard of all these things. And is that really how that money should be spent? How do we leapfrog the educational process? How do we ensure that the learning is happening, outcomes, and I think I saw something around outcome-based education versus competency-based education. How do we drive these competencies? I mean, competency is an outcome, right? But outcomes are variable, right? While competency is innate. So competency is something that you derive out of doing, right? Outcome is something that you just maybe you can wiggle your way around it. But competence is something that anytime you are asked about it, you are competent in it, right? So every time I speak around education, a lot of people that, how come you've been in education for 11 years, nobody knows you? Because it's been very, very difficult for me to come into a space where I don't believe my efforts will be appreciated, or whatever we're doing, would fall on deaf ears or fall on its face. And like Dr. Abimbola said, I want to give credit to Lagos State and to the Commissioner of Education, because until she became the commissioner, we have just been talking and nothing has happened. And I think, I'm really thankful that we have gone into that meeting. We were already effecting change within the system. And I believe, hopefully, Lagos State will be an example to a lot of other states around Nigeria and also in Africa. Hopefully, things continue to grow the way we're doing. I mean, it's a big problem, to be honest. Education is a very, very big problem. And Dr. Joe Abba talked about our population. Any country that wants to build its educational system we cannot continue to do this free education thing. To be honest, there's no how it will work for us in Nigeria. It can't. We've seen it for years. It's not working. No matter how much government decides to invest in it, as long as it continues to be free, people have to collaborate. We all contribute to this education. We leave it to government, it will continue to fail. Because it's very difficult for even model colleges to add tuition fees to model college. It's a struggle because everybody fights it. Do you understand? Education, we cannot continue to drive this effort of free education. I understand the politics of it, but the policy around it, we still fight this politics versus policy issue, right? And I mean, we're waiting for that person that will stand up and say, it cannot be free if you guys want to impeach me as a governor or whatever it is. I mean, but we know that that's not going to happen, or we hope that it happens sometime. But I think I want to be bold enough to say that until we address these issues, because now we are still waiting on money from GPE, from World Bank, from all these guys. And the thing is, if we start to build those systems, and it also goes down to trust. People don't trust the government. People don't trust the public sector. Do you understand? To be able to even say, oh, I would pay my taxes. The places that are doing free education, people pay taxes. And it is these taxes that are being used to fund these educational systems and these structures and things like that. So I think let's go back to the point of building backwards. What did we do to create good educational systems in the model colleges, in the St. Anne's, in the King's colleges of the past, in the Igbobi colleges of the past, in the UIs, and these are the same universities that, that graduated all of these great scholars that we have. So maybe we just need to step back a little bit, and then maybe we'll grow from there. I mean, there's a lot to say. I mean, this is something that we're very, very passionate about, and when we speak about it, sometimes it gets a bit too too emotional. So let me just pause and let other people speak. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you for that amazing reflection, Larry. We'll move on to Dr. John Mugo. Doctor, the world of work, right? And this has been reflected in the conversation Mr. Larry just had now. And we'll see clearly that it's what we measure, right, that we encourage, right? So, and we see that the world of work has moved on. But somehow our system of assessment has mostly remained in the past. And this sometimes has constrained teachers to teach to the test or teach to the assessment, an assessment that has actually remained backward. So how can we effectively design and implement competency assessments that ensure, quality of skills delivered in our institutions?
Thank you so much, Henry. And Dr. Abimbola finished by saying that she had not scratched the surface, but I was very scared because she scratched the whole surface. And I wondered really what it was there to talk about. And these issues, I think we can be very emotional about them. One, as you say, Henry, what is measured counts. Though they also say that you don't fatten a cow by measuring it. But measurement is actually a key component of what we are doing, because unless if we can be able to assess and be able to know whether the competencies we are looking for, those competencies that Landry is describing, like now for youth, what even Dr. Abba prioritized aspects of digital attitudes, but also the competencies for the digital world. If we are unable to measure these things, then we are unable to make progress. Through measurement, for instance, we have been able to establish that foundational skills like numeracy and literacy are very low. And indeed, Nigeria, when you look at, when we rank Africa, you find that the largest population of illiterate youth is in Nigeria, of course, by the virtue of Nigeria having a big population. But when you look into the future, look at the data by around 2050, for instance, that there are certain countries that will grow in very illiterate populations, unless if something is to be done today. Through our assessments, what we call citizen-led assessments, we've been able to establish, for instance, that less than 25% of children in any grade are learning at the level or can demonstrate the competences that are expected at the grade level. And this is even lower for most parts of Nigeria. And so being able to measure a competence is important, because one of the cancers of our education systems is focusing on scores, on examinations, on academic education only, and pushing our children to get A's, and that it's only the A that matters. But we know from emerging evidence that a person who is able to face this future we are talking about, this future that is already here, it has to be holistic. Employers, for instance, from studies that we conducted from 2019 and 2020, employers are complaining that yes, it is true, youth who are coming to work do not have the competences, the technical skills that are demanded by the world of work. But also employers say, for instance, if you go to a person who fixes cars, that mechanic or automotive engineering, whatever it is called, it is easier in industry to teach a young person how to fix a car. But it is difficult to give that person values at the workplace. If you bring a car to be fixed, for instance, at the garage, and you forget your money wallet in the car, now this guy could fix the engine, any way they can fix. But if they cannot resist and use a value structure to resist picking from that wallet, then I think fixing the car will not matter at the end. So how do we also bring in aspects of life skills, aspects of values into our education system? And now when we touch on values, like let's say respect, or let's say things that are demanded at the place of work, empathy is very important. How do you measure these kind of things? How do you know that a young person has problem-solving skills or collaboration, which is so demanded at the place of work, or even has self-awareness? Because unless if also you are self-aware, you'll be unable also to deal with other people. We can demand interpersonal skills, but if you are low on self-awareness, then you'll not be able to. So while Dr. Mo and I have perfected the way of measuring skills like literacy and numeracy, those are really easy to measure compared to these other kind of complementary competencies that are demanded, especially now to face the future. So we have been asking ourselves this question on how do you assess these kind of things that are so difficult. Even defining what it is a problem. And we have now established an initiative called the Assessment of Life Skills and Values in East Africa that we are doing in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And one of the things we are addressing is the capacities of our own, ourselves as East Africans, being able to measure it ourselves, because we are the ones who understand it best. We know that when you look at the whole space of social-emotional learning, if you look at tools and measurements that exist, they have been developed in other contexts and brought. Maybe they spend a week adapting this in one or two regions in Nigeria, and then they call it a Nigerian assessment. But where are the Nigerians, the academia, the people who grew up in those places, who will understand also these competencies best and how to apply them? So we are creating a movement of people, emancipating ourselves also and being protagonists in capacity development, so that we are able to contextualize these measurements and come up with our own definitions, our own understandings, but also our own measures that we could use to assess not just the education systems, but also at the youth level. If we were able to develop simple measures, because many of these assessments, again, are expert measurements, that anyone who has not, such kind of a level of education will never be able to apply it. How do we simplify the measurement? Because the measurement doesn't always need to be expert. It just needs to be an estimation. If you go to any village, even where most people have not been to school, and you ask them, in this village, do you have no one person who solves problems? They will refer you to somebody. And what measurement are they using? Certainly there is no tool. Certainly there is no definition of problem solving, but they use their own perceptions and experience over time through observation. So I think we need also to move measurement and assessment from this, OECD level and all that, and bring it to the level of the teacher. And I'm glad Dr. Ogundere is here, because if it is the teacher actually who is best placed to assess. Because if I come to Dr. Ogundere's school, to the kids' court, one day, those kids have never seen me. I come there and I look funny, I actually become the person being researched on, rather than the person researching. But a teacher who lives with those children every day at the classroom level is best placed to also assess them. But the same applies to parents. Because a parent really, if a parent has 4 children and you tell them to describe each child and how different they are, every parent will be able to do that. So isn't that assessment also? But then the fact that life skills and values and these other competencies that have to be built to bring in the whole youth development, a lot of this happens earlier in life, and it also happens at home. So how do we also make parents part of this conversation? Removing it from the ivory tower from what Dr. Abba called the gown, bringing it down to town, but also to home, so that people, as many people as possible, understand that measurement doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be functional to serve the purpose that it ought to. So I think we have opportunity here as people working in different spaces to emancipate measurement and assessment from the experts and bringing it down so that citizens could participate in these conversations, but also simplifying evidence and data. Many times we struggle communicating regressions and all that, and who understands and who cares? Because at the end of it all, can data inform change where change is needed? So I think all this I see as very useful dimensions that are required indeed to talk about leadership in this space of not just measurement, but also where change needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. John Mugo. I think some of your ideas, the ideas you are sharing is really interesting. And I think for some people, it might also be strange to hear about, a citizen-led assessment, right? Because, for example, I worked in the classroom and we did assessments of the students sometimes. And we have people, just as he said, strangers come in from wherever and do the assessment and leave, take the data and leave. And for us, that's always been, that is how it should be. So talking about a citizen-led assessment where parents can do this assessment and teachers can do this assessment, maybe, a little bit strange for some people, even listening now. Is there any, what is the advantage? Do you fear some sort of bias for teachers doing their own assessment, for instance, or parents doing their own assessment, for instance? What do you think? Why is this preferable over, expert-led OECD kind of assessment, for instance?
I think we fear assessment results, or we fear that assessment results will be manipulated where there is conflicting stake. So if we are using the assessment, for instance, to determine who goes to a better or a poorer school, then teachers are conflicted in their interest. You have every reason for giving your child a higher score. But if it is for the sake of even you as a teacher, determining and informing you what you should do and which child you should support. So how do we decolonize assessment from the high stakes that are placed there in our education system? I think that's the first thing to face. But then when people who are conducting the assessment are the ones who are familiar with that village where that assessment is being conducted or that household, one may say that they bring bias, but then maybe the effect of the bias that they bring by familiarity to the context is far much less than the inadequacy of the expert in connecting to what they are assessing. So citizen-led assessments kind of free. They give freedom to the assessment by making it everyone's business, but then also the purpose of these citizen assessment results being for public conversation. I think educating our children, what Dr. Abba is talking about, will we eat our children? I really like that, and it's really blunt how you Nigerians speak. But this is really what people are asking on the streets. So why should you hide data or assessment from them when all these questions are actually being asked on the streets? So freeing the assessment so that it's everyone's business. I think this is the easiest way to move conversations to where they belong.
Thank you so much, Dr. John. That's an amazing reflection, and it really goes down to really rethinking what the meaning of assessment even is in the first place for in our schools. They help us decide who to help and where to help instead of the traditional catching people who haven't read. And again, I would love to remind the audience and the delegates to remember to put in their questions. And we'll definitely get back. We'll definitely launch them to our speakers to answer. But for now, I would love to, go back to Dr. Ogundere. She mentioned some really interesting things about accountability in our education system. And I would love to, is there any case study, Dr. Ogundere, is there any example, whether within the country, outside the country, that have, put in this adequate accountability systems, especially when we talk about the relationship between government and, our school systems? Is there any case study you would love to show us that defines some of the things you were talking about?
Okay, thank you, Henry. I've just been here, nodding and enjoying the conversation. Well done, just nodding. But I was going to enter my so, I would start with Lagos State, for example, where there's an Office of Education Quality Assurance. And I know that, we have same across many of the states in Lagos, in Nigeria. And I know that they are working very hard towards ensuring that there's that continuous, unbiased, objective, supportive monitoring and evaluation of the school systems, especially in the private and public schools anyway. But I also want to talk about Ofsted, for example. Ofsted is the Office of Standards in Education in the United Kingdom, for example, whereby they go into the schools, right? And they spend days, weeks in the schools, and they look at every aspect of what makes up a school system. They do, students surveys, teacher surveys, observe teaching and learning. And what they do, again, in alignment with what Mr. John Mogo has said, is that they then say, these are, based on our observation, right? These are the things that we have seen or identified, either red flagged or even just said fantastic work that you need to do more work with. And what happens is that they then go ahead and give these schools enough. This is a governmental organization, just again like OEQA, in Lagos and many of the states. And they give them that time, that support, the training, whereby we are monitoring because we are not monitoring because we want to punish, or we are monitoring because we want to support. We are monitoring because it's good at times for someone to come outside, come from outside your institution and just look from outside in to say, this is where you are at, do you want to think about A, B, C, D, and E? And I think that it has helped, their system to just ensure that quality, right? The quality that is necessary, for them to continue to just provide what it is that students need or children need. So I think it's also something that, in Nigeria is work in progress. I don't know if Dr. John has maybe a similar, organization, over there in Kenya. But I think that we need to be intentional. I think we need to be intentional about ensuring that the schools, they are doing what they are supposed to do. And we should not assume, we should not, we need to have the data that states that, oh yes, 20% of our schools, 30% of our schools, 40% of our schools are doing what they need to do. And if these are the gaps, how do we, right, help them to close the gaps? So if there's a gap in teaching and learning, if there's a gap, for example, in leadership, if there's a gap in care, we've had a situation going on in Nigeria now. There's a gap in care. How do we ensure that we know the gap? Somebody needs to know the gap. Something that does not get measured doesn't get, somebody needs to know these are the gaps. Then how do we systematically, using the data that we have, how do we begin to close those gaps? I think where we are, over here is that we are at the point where we are beginning to try to measure, to try to monitor and evaluate. But I don't think that we have created a system where we say, oh, based on our evaluation, based on all the work that we have done, these are the 4, 5, 6 things that we need to tackle, and set a goal for ourselves to say, okay, in the next 2 years, in the next 3 years, using these strategies, we would have tackled these things such that we're able to close those gaps. Educational institutions should not just be allowed to continue to run and run that, some measure of monitoring and evaluation.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Ogundere. And, just continuing from where you stopped, I would love to, engage with Mr. Larry here on, he talked about this balance between politics and policy, and he mentioned, the problem with free education, right? And how it is not tenable, or it hasn't even been tenable. And, a question keep nagging on my mind, and that is, won't we have a problem with access if that is made? How do you try to solve that, considering the state of poverty in our communities? If you put a price, right? Don't you think we'll have maybe a kind of barrier, right? Children not able to access this education. Have you thought about that? And how do you think we can make policies to circumvent that problem if it arises?
Okay, thank you very much. So now, obviously, for me to even say that, I was expecting, this question. So first of all, I think the idea of free education has left parents very, very lazy, and to the point where a parent would rather spend money to buy a Ashwebi than to pay for the children's school fees. We're using this poverty thing as, there's something called BOP, bottom of pyramid, right? What is poverty really? It is international data that says that, Nigerians or Africans are living below a certain amount of money a day. $1 a day is enough to educate a child, right? 50 cents a day is enough to educate it. We are talking about charging for tuition fees, and we're not talking about ridiculous amount of money. That is where data comes in, right? I heard of a school in Abuja called the 100 Naira School or something like that. I can't remember what it is, where they pay some amount every day for education. It is collaborative. We've left it to the point where parents, and I'm saying that because family is the part of education. Your first level of education is in the family before you start to even go to school, right? So it is everybody's duty. It is my duty. It is the government's duty. It's the Ministry of Education. So as a parent, when does educating my child become important for me? Because it's free, I send my child to the school and I don't have to worry. But at the same time, whether I'm selling pepper, I'm selling pure water, I'm making money. I'm eating every day, right? So when we are talking about education not being free, it's not because we're trying to levy people out of their comfort zone. No, we're trying to say that this is a collaborative effort between the government. So let's call it subsidized education. Let's call it subsidized education. Let's not call it free education, because if we subsidize it, it means that everybody has a role to play. So parents, please contribute 100 Naira a week. I don't think there's anybody raising a child right now that feeds that child every day, unless the ones there's the far-reaching end of it where some people don't have food to eat, and that is a fact, right? And where do those problems stem from? So we'll go back to also even the skills gap and all of those things, employment and unemployment, and all these people that we call poor people, every day they're still alive. Right? They are not, these kids are going to school, they are doing all of those things, but they eat. And like I said, I'll go back to, we're not asking for ridiculous amounts of money, right? So it just becomes collaborative. It means that let everybody be responsible for this, right? Let parents come into this conversation as well. Dear parents, please, we need to give your children better education, better food in schools, all of these things. We left school feeding system to the government, and you are complaining that they are giving them rice with water stew. I mean, what do you expect, right? I mean, it's what do you really expect? Because it's a no-brainer, right? So I think the simple answer to that is let's involve family in our education. It's collaborative. We need to bring in the family system. Once a child starts going to school, it's no longer the parents' headache anymore. So now anything that happens to that child is the responsibility of the school. I'm sure Dr. Abimbola knows, has had a lot of instances where I'm sure parents would blame the school for every single thing. Then where is your responsibility? Oh, my child is not passing in school, it is the school. My child is not passing in mathematics, it is the teacher. Some cases, yes, it's true. But where do you come in as a parent? How much time do you spend with your child ensuring that whatever they learn becomes competency and not just outcome? Because it used to be about, oh, my child came first. It used to, that's the pride of every child, every parent. Oh, my child graduated with the first class. I've hired first class people with, sorry to say, but zero competency. And I've hired third class people with a lot of competency. So I believe that that collaborative effort between government, the private sector, and the family is where we need to get back to. And those conversations, and that's why those people need to be in these conversations. Because, everybody here, we're still very, very high level. We need to get granular with a lot of our activities. We need to really go down to the grassroots. We are good. All of us here, we are okay. Trust me, we're fine. But we're trying to solve problems of people that don't have some of the access that we had, some of the advantages and opportunities that we had growing up. And, when does education for all really happen? Education for all means when we bring everybody into the conversation. Uncle, auntie, father, mother, private organization, government, NGO, everybody into this conversation. Trust me, 20 million Lagosians, if we have maybe say, for example, 5 million of them being parents sending kids to schools in Lagos, 1 million kids in Lagos State schools, 100 naira a week is 100 million naira a week into the educational system. If we can levy, they don't want to pay it because they believe that it is your duty as government. So when do you let them know that it is our duty as a state or as a nation to educate our children? That is where we need to take conversations. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's a really good food for thought there for us all, really. And that actually, now we'll go right into the questions. Some of the questions I've seen in the chat box, and I think your reflection there leads us directly into that. And the first question goes to Dr. John Mugo, and it says, can you please advise on how to involve parents on a large scale in public schools in children assessment? How do we involve parents in assessment, in children assessment in our public schools?
Yeah, I think collapsing the wall that exists between home and school is what we should aspire, because learning happens everywhere. Previously, we were convinced that learning happens at school, but we know now, especially through COVID, that maybe as much learning happens in both spaces. So, and then increasingly also the adult population, literacy and even education levels are going up. So while previously when I was going to school in rural Kenya, maybe 10% of the people in that village were literate. Right now, it's probably 90% in that village. So the potential of also people, be they parents or also other children in that space to contribute is immense. And every school needs to realize that when you tap the potential of home and bring that to school, then you make a lot of progress. I give a story of one head teacher. We are talking about school leaders who was being moved from one school. He was always posted to very bad schools, and bad schools are very far away from town. And it would take him 3 years to move that school from a bad school to one of the best in the region. And then once he fixes that, he would be posted to another further one, a very bad one. And so when he was asked after like 5 schools, fixing schools, what was his recipe? He just said that when he arrives at a school, the first thing he does is to open the school gate and call the community, and they discuss the school. So he opens the door of the school to the family, so that collaboratively they build it together. And he said that style of leadership is what is able to draw all the resources that parents, neighbors, business people, the people who own shops around can bring to make progress to education. If I were to go and assess, children like these complex competencies, I would not have an assessment that is complete without talking to people who live with that child. So I think that centrality of the parent, of the family, of the neighbor, of local administration in making progress. Any school that discovers that, they make a lot of progress, not just in assessment, but also in reaching other competencies, in achieving the competencies that children desire.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. John. And we're almost running out of time here. So I would just love to highlight one more question for us to answer. And this question is from Jonah Amosu. He says, according to the NPC, there are 19 million Nigerians living with disability. This means that if we're really 200 million, about 10% of our population is disabled. How is the Nigerian educational sector including these people in their plans? What measures, policies are being put in place to ensure that they get a good education? So do we have anyone here on the panel who would love to address this question?
I think I can speak to it a little bit. So now, in terms of the plans for the government, I can't speak to that, but I can I can speak to what is happening. I know that a number of private schools have started the special needs arm of their schools. I just hope that it would I know there's a school for the blind in Lagos State and all of that. And disabilities, I mean, there are schools here and there are pockets of schools here and there for disabled people. But that is also where information and collaboration with family comes in, right? Where do these families even know that they can take their kids? And then we go back to the culture and religion problem that we have. Maybe not problem, maybe problem is not the right word, but the culture and religion disadvantage that we have, that if a child, for example, has maybe some kind of maybe specially able, maybe things like maybe Down syndrome and dyslexia and some of those learning disabilities. In a lot of places, those children are castigated, right? They are never given an opportunity to even try to learn. It is only, and that is the disadvantage within this classist economy that we find ourselves. It is really only the middle upper class that would see that as an opportunity to harness the skills. I mean, I know of a child with Down syndrome that is one of the best swimmers that Nigeria has produced, right? I know of a blind child that draws, right? That is a very great artist. I don't know how that's possible, but these things are there, and those skills are harnessed either by parents or and they are mostly in advantaged families, right? You don't really find them in families where like let's say the BOP families. I don't really like to use that word, but yeah. So I think it's also important that government, if we're talking about government makes it more known that these schools are available for you to send your kids to, because a lot of those kids are just kept in the room somewhere. So I think it's just really about the awareness, right? And I think even more private sector partners, should also start to create special needs opportunities for their students and for in their schools. I think with that, would be able to really harness. I mean, that's a huge number. I'm actually just getting that data for the first time. 19 million people is very, very huge. They create space for people with physical disabilities, like like the handicapped ones. But most times, there's also the learning disabilities that we also need to create space for. And I think that's a conversation that really needs to come to the forefront. And I'd like to also mention, Henry, we've not really talked a lot about higher education, because when we're looking at the future, right, the future and the skills and all of this, Dr. Abba mentioned a number of things. I think it's something that we also need to address, right? Like Dr. Abimbola said, the future is now, because it is what we build now that would transcend into the future, right? So like I said, the theme of this conversation is then, now, and the future. So then being, let's go back to the good things that used to happen then. How do we juxtapose the education of then and the education of now, and how do we implement it into the now, and how do we start to drive it into the future conversations for posterity's sake. I think we should just maybe close with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. Thank you for that addition. I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, Dr. Ogundere, Dr. John Mugo, Mr. Larry. Thank you so much. I wish we could continue this session for 1 more hour, but unfortunately, time is against us. So we would have to stop here. But so far, the panelists have shared, rich insights into education management and how leaders of educational institutions can move their systems to deliver on their promises to the community and to young people everywhere. Dr. Ogundere had talked about how we need to ground our education systems and how we need to provide a consensus of on the purpose of education. She has talked about a multi-sectoral approach that brings together government, parents, students, teachers, and spoke strongly against silos, against working in silos, and promoting collaboration instead. She talked about collaboration and creating a data-driven systems. So just moving on from that, Mr. Larry spoke about the need to focus on STEM and because on STEM and STEAM, because it directly relates to the problem-solving capacity we have to build for today. He talked about going back and looking at the foundations of the past, foundation of our education systems in the past, and also really interestingly about the balance between politics and policy today. And of course, if we don't measure all these things, we can't really know if we're making progress. And Dr. John Mugo talked about the decolonizing and emancipating measurement from the hands of the experts to the level of teachers and parents in our everyday life. So this has been a really interesting and I really apologize that we couldn't get to every question, but I'm sure TEP Center would find a way to ensure these questions are answered, maybe sent to the speakers and they would maybe write an email back. Again, thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Again, my name is Henry Anumudu, and it was such an I had such an amazing time moderating this session.
For the session, and Mr. Larry Ogundipe, Dr. John Mugo, Dr. Abimbola Ogundere, thank you all very much. I think one thing that has come out from this particular plenary is that there was a key question asked, or a key question that would sort of kickstart conversations. Mr. Larry Ogundipe spoke about policy versus politics. He also spoke about the idea or the policy or the initiative of free education. Dr. Ogundere spoke about different curricula that exists in our schools in Nigeria, from the British to the American to the Indian to different countries that we hear. And she had a key question: do we have a Nigerian system that we are using to implement this? And even Dr. Mugo also mentioned the concern that comes up, or that has come up with assessments. And that has made this particular plenary very interesting. And we have had a lot of conversations, even in the chat session. And I would just like to read out some comments. We have Dorothy saying, good day everyone, and thank you so much to our panelists and Mr. Henry Anumudu and all the participants. This has been a wonderful discussion around quality of education. We also have Dr. Olu Obenforua saying, insightful conversation, it's indeed within the collective interest of all stakeholders that free quality education should be available from early childhood up to at least GSS 3. And this is what I was talking about, right? So we already have a conversation based on the question that Mr. Larry Ogundipe asked. Mrs. Alera Ida Otubo also says interesting conversation ongoing. And insightful and informative. You can just go through the chat sections, and you will see a lot of this. Dr. Mo says we certainly need more holistic measures of skills and competences. As John says, measuring the cow doesn't fatten it, but let us know where and how to start the fattening process. All in all, at the end of the day, we have had a very interesting day. And one thing that has stood out for me from Dr. Juaba's session is where he spoke about, and it's something that is common across the continent of Africa, where he says we have, for the youth of now, we have grown up or we have been formed by adversity, right? But he says out of this adversity has come up opportunities. Right, and this goes from digital identity to digital solutions to whatever issues we're having. And so the question that we need to answer is, despite this adversity that we have as a continent and for the African youth, how can we harness these opportunities that Dr. Juaba highlighted in his article that was written in 2019? And what we'll do is, I mean, if you want to read more about the article, like I said, it's on Sahara Reporters, and it was published in 2019. We can always get the title of the article and paste it before the end of today. Very quickly, we'll be moving on to a very interesting session for today, and which is going to be the last conversation for today. In 2019, the Education Innovation Summit introduced something called the Fireside Chat. And back then it was a physical summit, and so we had people. It was quite relaxing, but very insightful, because the people who were in that conversation, or who led the conversation, gave a lot of insights to the topic that we were talking about. We have come again this year, and I can call it the second edition of our Fireside Chat, right? And this year we're talking about policy priorities for skills development in Africa's next decade. We have spoken about the Future Ready Africa. We have spoken about the education management system, all connected to the African youth and skill development. Now we are talking about policy priorities for skills development in Africa's next decade. This session will be moderated by the Managing Director of the Education Partnership Center. I'm sure she'll be wondering why I have said this thing so many times between yesterday and today. She's someone that needs no introduction, but for those of you who do not know her, who were not here yesterday, Dr. Mudipe Adefeso Olateju is a policy expert that has worked on various education innovation programs globally and in Nigeria, her home country. Ladies and gentlemen, to introduce us into this fireside chat, please give a round of applause to Dr. Mudipe Adefeso Olateju.
Thank you so much, Ope, and I hope that you can all hear me clearly. It's been an absolute delight to listen to the conversations today. The amount of insights, the candor, and just the sheer pragmatism that I've heard today, I think is not only delightful, but it's imperative for us to pay attention to. We are no longer in the business as usual phase of doing things. The pandemic has made sure of that. And so it is wisdom for any nation state, whether it's Nigeria or another country in sub-Saharan Africa or other countries around the world, to think very deeply about how we build skills for the 21st century, which started 21 years ago. And so it's a pleasure to begin this new session. I'm particularly drawn to this session because it gives us an opportunity to take a deep dive, not only into the clinical dimensions of education and the topic that we are going to be focusing on, but also gives us an opportunity to take a sneak peek into the lives of those whom we are going to be speaking with, and to share in their own personal experiences, learn from their personal journeys as well. So it is such an honor, such a delight to welcome two distinguished people to this fireside chat. The first is Mrs. Alero Aida Otobo. Mrs. Alero Aida Otobo is a juggernaut in the education sector. I call her the mothership, and she knows why I call her the mothership. She has a way of birthing new things and ensuring that they stay alive. She is the founder of Incubator Africa, co-founder of the Education Reform and Innovation Team. She sits on the board of the Human Capital Africa organization, and she's also vice chancellor of the School of Public Policy and Politics and Government. I don't know how she wears all of those hats, but I think she'll tell us today. Very welcome, a very warm welcome to you, Mrs. Alero Aida Otobo. And secondly, Mr. Eitayo Ogumola. Mr. Eitayo Ogumola is somebody that I hold so much respect for. He is an inspiration on social media. For those of you who follow his LinkedIn account, you know that he's such an incredible inspiration. Frankly, I don't know where he gets all the time to put up all these LinkedIn posts. It's a skill I think I need to develop. But he is the CEO of UTIVA, and UTIVA is one of the leading education technology organizations. I particularly like that he refers to himself as the tech evangelist. That's what he refers to himself as. And he does do that. He does evangelize tech, and he simplifies it so that people can understand. I'd like to welcome you both. I'm going to give you both 1.5 minutes to properly introduce yourselves, starting with Mrs. Alero Aida Otobo and then Mr. Eitayo Ogumola. Please, 1.5 minutes to tell us a bit about yourself.
Thank you very, very, very much, Mo. First, thank you for inviting me to this fireside chat. It's always such a pleasure to sit and, oh my God, Aita, that's a good idea. As you sipped that tea, coffee, I thought, yeah, okay. So, okay, so thank you, pleasure to meet you all. How do I introduce myself? You've said what needs to be said. I think in a few words, maybe to talk about what I'm passionate about. I'm really passionate about transforming individuals to become the transformation agents that a nation needs. So it's not personal transformation for the sake of I'm a better person, but connecting you to your purpose, which needs to be connected to the nation. So it's not purpose for the sake of I have a purpose. It's how does your purpose connect to nation building? So everything that I do is sort of connected to that. And from wearing the different hats, sitting on various organizations, is to get them to play their own role and their own part. I usually lay foundations, so I call myself a foundation layer. I start the building. Once the first floor is built, I'm usually out of the door. So the foundation is always important. And I have a mentor that says that it takes 3 years to lay a strong foundation. So as a foundation layer, I've laid foundation for Teach for Nigeria, for Slum to School, and various other organizations. And right now I'm laying the foundation for the School of Politics, Policy and Governance. I'm loving that because I've finally woken up to the reality that unless we fix politics and connect the fixing of politics to the other spheres and sectors in the economy will be wasting our time, and will take a lot longer to get to where we need to get to. So in a nutshell, summary, I'm a transformation strategist working on individuals, organizations, and the nation. I work in various organizations, but I stay at the strategic level. And I thoroughly enjoy what I'm doing. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that the fact that you enjoy what you're doing is palpable. We can all feel it, and those of us that work with you can sense it. And thank you for all that you do. Eitayo, do you want to spend a minute and a half telling us a bit more about yourself?
Absolutely, absolutely. I am very privileged to be sitting with the two of you. I call these two amazing giants, you know, the godmothers of the education industry. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Eitayo is my name. I lead. I love my job so much because I get to meet hundreds of young people almost every week, you know, in our master classes where I sell and evangelize, you know, technology to them. And that's pretty much because I wouldn't have been able to successfully imagine what would have happened to me if I had not moved into tech. I mean, because I had a very great education, you know. I went to boarding school, went to an African Church Model College, went to University of Ilorin, graduated from school, became unemployed for 2 years. You know, I was really shocked because I thought that I would leave school and life will just, you know, happen. But I left school, you know, into the job market, and it was very frustrating for me to land my first job. You know, outspoken young person, energetic Nigerian, pretty much good education if you think about it. 2 years out of school, no job. But I had my first opportunity, had a mentor that sat me down and told me about the technology industry. That was in 2012. There was pretty much nothing. There was no Andela, no Flutterwave, no Piggyvest, you know, no Paystack. The tech industry in Nigeria was pretty much too early. And it told me, Tayo, if you plug yourself into this technology industry, something is coming. It's a big wave. You just have to get in. And I think today it's the same evangelism that I'm doing. There's something bigger is happening. You know, we need to mobilize Africans right now because it's going to be big. There is a big wave. So the core of the work that I do is, you know, mobilizing Africans into getting ready for that wave, because this is our opportunity. And I think COVID has tested it also. Like we can isolate ourselves from the world and still win if we understand the strategy. And the strategy is talent development. We need to equip our young people to really, really understand how to get into tech. And that's the core of the work that I do.
That's absolutely fascinating. You know, I think it's wonderful when you ask a person to introduce themselves, and before they say what they do, they start by, I love my job. And I'm hoping that several people, you know, here on this at this conference will catch that fire as well. Mrs. O, as I refer to you. Now, you've had quite the eclectic journey. I know that you've worked in banking, human resource management, public sector advisory in health, politics and policy, developing skills in young people. I know that you are a transformation strategist, but I want to start this conversation today by asking, what is the thread that runs through your career journey? And the reason I ask this question is because when we think about skills development, it's very easy to put them down to technical skills and forget that motivation and vision, just as Eitayo has said, you know, being able to see where you're going, and being able to join the dots is in itself a skill. As you reflect back over your many, many years of experience, what's that thread that runs through?
Excellent question, though. Very, very good question. 6 months ago, I may not have been able to answer it the way I'm about to answer it. But I had one of those aha moments during lockdown about 4 months ago or so. I was standing by my window and looking out, and it suddenly struck me, Alero, a public servant. Now, that may not sound very profound, but I've gone on a 35-year journey, if not more. A banker, got to the top, served on the board of the the largest bank at that time. I was the youngest board member. I thought I was a private sector person. I came out, did education. I'm still thinking I'm an entrepreneur. Okay, set up Incubator Africa, thinking we're going to make money. And then 3 decades later, I arrived where I started at the beginning, when I joined the civil service of Nigeria. I was motivated by my father to join the civil service. I felt that serving my nation as a civil servant was what was key. After 5 years, my eyes opened and I said, you know what? It's private sector. So to arrive 2 decades later, to realize that service is what runs through my blood. Service to serve individuals, like I said, organizations, public sector, private sector, is the connecting dot that runs through. And to serve well, I'm realizing you need certain qualities. And that's why I was very pleased to hear what John from Kenya, a Kenyan friend, said earlier on. The measurement, we need to begin to measure and assess life skills and values. You can't serve if you don't have values. You can't. Service is undergirded by values, and we need those values to be taught in our classrooms. So when we talk about quality education, I'm always wary about this quality education. Let's begin to break it down. And don't tell me 21st century skills. It's more than that. It's about character education. It's about investigative education. And the third is nation building education. We need to begin to weave this. And I think what has happened, if I'm going to say the common thread, is that these 3 sets of education is what has been seeded into my DNA from my primary school to my Queen's College service, to university service, to the masters that I did. And so that's the common thread. And the question is it teachable? And I'm leaving that as a question. That's my common thread.
Thank you so much for that, ma'am. And I think that that's actually an excellent question for Mr. Itayo. The reason for that is because very often I speak with people who have spent many, many years working, people like yourself, Mrs. O, people older than you who have retired from active service, people who are octogenarians, and I ask them to reflect on their lives. And very often there are regrets that they have, which really revolve around the lack of information. Had they known better, they would have done better. Had they known better, they would have chosen better. Now we're in an age where we don't know what jobs people are going to be doing in the next 10 years, right? Itayo, yesterday, I was watching a program on television, and there were these robots that were being trained. They're called humanoid robots that are being trained. And it occurred to me that in another 10 years, we might have a whole new species of technology that is very human. And you're going to need a whole new set of skills, perhaps a whole new set of values to be able to really orient that in the way that it is helpful to humanity and not harmful. So Mrs. O has asked a pertinent question. Are these skills teachable? Are values teachable? I know that you've had some hard knocks in life and you've picked yourself up. In a sense, you've fallen forward. What are you learning? Because you're still quite early on in your own journey relative to some of the other people, who have done 30, 40 years of a career, built, a career of 30, 40 years. What are you learning about the teachability, not just of hard technical skills, but also of values, the sort of values that we need more and more in society today?
Yeah, absolutely. This is quite a very interesting conversation, because one of the things I've always said and advocated for is there's always a connection between the older generation and the newer ones, right? Usually what happens to the younger generation is we just want to be disconnected from the older generation. And I understand the sentiment. But if you connect the dots, you would understand that it's some of the values that we're talking about. You can train someone to engulf and imbibe some of these values, using the modern models and the modern approaches. In those days, my mom would have to sit down with us, and walk us through some stories as a way to help us reflect. But it's so difficult today to sit down with to sit down with children and kids because they're interacting with many technologies, so they're distracted, right? But you can also use the same technology to train them some of the values. See, learning how to program takes a lot of patience. If you can commit 1 year of your life learning a programming language, then you have a major value. You must have patience. And I see that happen in many of our classes, for instance, the rate of drop-off, how people just give up when you say, hey, learn SQL. And then you say this young child, I studied chemistry. Why it's difficult for me? Like, no, I see the whole generation, people that studied chemistry go into banking and then they rise to the top of the leadership. So why do you think that because you study chemistry, you cannot learn a programming language? So there's an interconnection between what we ultimately want to achieve, which is, having a much more value-driven society and the modernization of skills. So I kind of think that we cannot take away, some of the basic values that you need to have if you really want to achieve that ultimate, success as an individual and as a country, as a nation, as a continent. Because we can have all the technologies around us. I look forward to the time where technologies can take care of kids, and the parents can easily sleep at night, and sleep well, and rely on the technology, do the good job. But someone needs to write that, line of code and ensure that you understand parenting and parenting values and build that parenting values into the line of code. Because maybe we like it or not, we would have these technologies. I was in Barcelona just a month ago. And then I realized that the room I stayed had, Internet of Things. Once a particular item is exhausted in the fridge, it connects to Amazon and then it orders, for me, without having to do that. A parent from a place of work can put on the TV when the child gets back home without having to, you can hear the sound of your mom at home just talking and whispering, and then you think the mom is at home. All these things that we can train technologies to do all these things, right? But these technologies would not train themselves. People would have to teach them, would have to train them. And you don't want to build biases into these technologies. So we need to build a generation that is very, very value-driven first. And that is the fundamental thing that we need to fix. Because if we have a value-driven technology, people will not... I was having a conversation with my friend a month ago, and then we talked about cybercrime in Nigeria. And he said, oh, it's because of unemployment. And I said, that's not true. I worked with university students. University students are moving into cybercrime. It has nothing to do with unemployment because they are not even graduate yet. You've not even graduated yet. So what evidence do you have that there are no jobs? It's greed. It's a societal pressure, to drive the best cars. It has nothing to do with unemployment. It's possible for us to build a generation of people that say, there are no jobs in Africa, but I would create these jobs without becoming cyber criminals. So the conversation, we need to adjust a little bit and say, hey, enough of all these, we need to, if we want to scale technical education and technology education on the continent, we need to fix character problem first, because people would drop off. If you invest a lot of money into learning, they would not complete this training. When you don't have this basic value, the tenacity, the honesty to say, I need help, when you need them, all these basic things, we need to fix them. And that's why, we started Utiva Kids, because we realized that, I got to a point I was tired of adults. And I said, we need to go back to kids. It's easy to train children because you could help them build a character, very early. And if they build a character, you can learn anything if you have that very basic, character. And that's pretty much, the way I connect those two ends of the spectrum.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. And I'm going to draw on that and go back, to Mrs. O, because you touched on something that's really sensitive in Nigeria, and that's unemployment. And as you've rightly said, we blame a lot on unemployment, and perhaps, in some contexts, we are justified. But issues around character themselves might be the reason for which our unemployment levels are even so high. So the question I wanted to ask you to reflect on, Mrs. O, was, looking at some of the work that you do, first of all, at the beginning of the pipeline, where you're advocating for foundational skills for children, at early childhood and primary level, all the way to the work that you're doing at post-tertiary, where you're building skills and competencies and values in people, some of whom are quite young, that want to serve in the public sector. And I'm asking myself, a lot of young people simply do not have opportunities because they have not built foundational competencies. So first of all, where are the spaces for these foundational competencies to be built? Is our schooling system doing enough? Do parents need to begin to mobilize a bit better and do more? Do our religious institutions, civil society organizations need to come into this discussion? Because on the one hand, the ability to read and write is one thing, or the inability to read and write is one thing. But then knowing the difference between what is right and what is wrong is totally different. And all of these can be labeled foundational skills. So where are the spaces that we can consider to be opportunities to begin to build these skills early on?
Loaded question. More very loaded question. And the insight, you've already actually brought very valuable insight into the conversation. Because I'm very passionate about foundational learning. And I think it's one of the missing pieces in our educational system. I also think that we need to think very creatively about how we raise the next generation from 0 to 8. I think we need to start thinking outside the classroom, because raising them may not be within the classroom, within a school. I think we need to start getting very creative and looking at models that have been successful, perhaps within the African context and outside the African context, and begin to explore those possibilities. And the good thing with the pandemic, I think one of the fallout of the pandemic is that it's taking us out of this mindset of thinking school has to happen in the classroom. Just as the mindset of thinking we have to go to work and go to an office that is a physical location. I think that has that mindset has been totally challenged. And I'm hoping that the new normal will not be to say, let's go back to what we're doing. and that we will continue to pursue this line of thinking. So where am I going with this? For example, wouldn't it be great if we had cluster learning in different communities? Going back to the under the tree, mothers taking responsibility and actually helping mothers in communities to teach them how to ensure that their children understand the skills that they need to acquire at the foundational level, and doing it creatively. There's a group that I'm working with that we're challenging to say, can you create a learning kit that we can give parents? A learning kit that we can give to young people in the communities, and say, with this, you can infuse certain knowledge, skills, values into young children that are playing, that you're working with, and creating that environment. I think early childhood, we cannot implement early childhood like they do in the Scandinavian countries. I think we have a model. There's an African model. And the first person that threw my attention to that was an young American lady. I can't remember her name right now, but she's actually written a book on early childhood education in an African context. That our storytelling is powerful, and we're not using it enough. We're not utilizing that model enough. That the playing in markets, we can create centers in the market where mothers are already taking their children to, and lay a strong foundation there. She has been able to unpack, and again, it's so sad that it's taking someone who has lived in Nigeria for over a decade to capture our strength, our essence, and give us a model that is possible. So I think we need to come out of the old space called the classroom, create new spaces that's already happening, cluster learning, community learning, under the tree. And I'm even going to challenge and say in churches and in mosques, they are not utilized from Monday to Saturday. School can happen there. And I was recently, and this is where I'm going to close, I was at a conference that challenged imams and Christians, pastors, to let's start having what they call pastor educators. So they're pastors, but Mondays to Fridays, they become educators that actually teach in schools, in their churches. Not setting up a school that is run by the church, and then they have different, no. They are, and then that way, they're infusing values and knowledge and skills. And I think we have to start exploring those new models. And also, I'll close by saying it's time for the health, because of what we've just been through pandemic, the health sector to handshake more powerfully with the education sector. I can't see why children have to go to the health center to get their jabs. Why can't the health sector come to schools and give the jabs? They're in school. Why can't they come to the community center? Why must they wait for people to come to them? These are all just thoughts that we can ponder on. Thank you.
I think these are incredible points that you're making, Mrs. Uru. I remember my dad, if were he alive today, would have been about 90 years old, telling us about how they used to have dental checks in school. And so the dentist would come to the schools and would check to see whether they had good dental hygiene. And I suppose other healthcare professionals would come to school. And so there's a sense in which, what Eitaya was referring to earlier on about learning, this intergenerational learning. There's a lot of information that we've lost, along the way in terms of how to parent, how to support children. And I think that there's definitely scope, for us to do that. My mind also goes back to when you talked about the importance of storytelling. My mind goes back to my favorite teacher. And anyone who's a teacher here or has studied education knows that regardless of what level you study education at, you will write an essay. You will be required to write an essay on your favorite teacher. And I always keep coming back to the same person. And he was my primary 5 teacher. And one of the things that Mr. Olufua would make us do was to learn a proverb every day. And so we would come, into the class, and he would have a proverb for the day, and we would memorize it, and he would explain it to us, and he would help us understand and contextualize that proverb. We were 9 and 10 years old, but I think that must have made an impact, because 30 years later, I still remember that with fondness. But Eitai, I'm going to come back to you now. But before I do that, I just wanted to say to those of us who are joining us to please continue to write in your comments. And if you have any questions, please do type them up so that we can take them toward the end of this session. But Eitai, Mrs. O has made an incredibly important point. And one of the points that I want to touch on is looking from the outside at government. Now, you are someone who has done a lot of fascinating work, as a private sector player. And I want to switch the conversation now a little bit to government, because we're going to try and conclude with policy and what sort of direction we should be looking at. I remember an event that we organized called EdMeets Tech, and it was really about bringing education policymakers, into a meeting room with technology leaders, so that the priorities would be shared, across the table. And we had a very dynamic young person representing UTIVA, at that meeting. And just the amount of passion that he had, talking about what UTIVA could, there was no problem that the government highlighted. He said, look, UTIVA can solve that. Yes, we can definitely do that, And so sort of looking, from outside in, what sort of conversations should we be making sure that our policymakers are having if we're going to get to that utopia that you're referring to, where we're using technology to teach values, the utopia that Mrs. O is referring to, where we have these amazing community centers, where young people can come and learn, where we can harness the capabilities of different people, in the ecosystem. What is there even a role for government? Maybe that's the first question. Or is government completely irrelevant in this conversation? But if it isn't, where is that space? And again, it's you reflecting from the outside, from outside of government, into what government should be doing better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so if I will pick the very small element of education, which is, technology education, right? Helping people to learn technology skills. One of the things that we've realized is the problem is just too big for any single private sector company to solve. One of the leaders in the technology learning space, Andela, raised more than $300 million, could not even train 5,000 people, because learning itself is expensive. To help someone move from the very ground zero level to a much more incubated level requires that you train the person for 4 months. And then to get the person from and then employers are not interested in hiring juniors, right? They want to hire senior talented, Then to get them from junior to senior requires a 1.5 year, committed learning. And that's if the stacks are not changing. So that is just to say that the government is the biggest funder of education. The government really needs to be, on the same table with private sectors. Because if you play right on the field, I can tell you for free, we launched, just an example, we launched the Oni Tech Scholarship to provide access to short courses for just 100 people. We had 12,000 people registered. How on earth can UTIVA provide scholarship to 12,000 people? I mean, and that's 12,000 people that had access to, the information. I mean, there are millions of Africans. In fact, World Economic Forum says that we have to conduct 650 million training between now and 2030 to position Africa for the future of work. We're talking about a continent of 600 million young people by 2030, larger than China. I mean, we have to get the government on the table, to work with private sector organizations to drive, and that's technology education. I'm still not talking about primary, secondary, medical, dentistry, and other forms of education that needs to go on the continent. So it's a very big challenge. And one of the fastest ways to doing this is we need more platforms that, help drive conversations between the people in government and the folks that are implementing, private sector driven intervention. I am always of the opinion that, except for the devil, there is no one that is really, really interested, in a failed society. So most of the people in government, we that are in private sector really need to be very empathetic. We need to try to understand things from their perspective, because it can be very bureaucratic, to get things to move. And that was because I played in I wasn't a government official, but I worked with universities, right? 30 universities, trying to build, and that was very early stage of UTIBA, trying to build small incubators in all the universities, just to get my letter to get to the vice chancellor, right, was a tug of war. It could stay with the secretary for a month. It's just a very bureaucratic system. And I understand why it's also very bureaucratic, because academia, are quite very process-driven people. But I think that we can fast track and accelerate this process if we start with, number one, we need to create a common ground, a platform that allows, the private sector guys and the government, to interact and say, hey, we want to support you. What's the biggest problem that you have? If I have the opportunity to sit down with the Commissioner of Education, of Lagos State, I could propose, why can't we just train, 100,000 Lagosians on this and this, and then share with her what we have done to train 13,000 people, and say, hey, this model works for 13,000 people without the government. With the government intervention, we might be able to scale it. And Jobberman is doing that. So it's not a miracle. Jobberman is currently working with the people in the government to take education to local governments in Lagos and in Kano. So some of these things are available. What is absent is, number one, a very common platform that allows this conversation to happen at scale. And that was what the guys in the financial services did, created the bankers committee to interact with the CBN continuously. Do we have a committee? Right. We don't have a committee to interact with the vice chancellors. We need to have a committee that brings the vice chancellors and the private sector guys into one room, continue to have conversations, because when we have conversations with debates, and when we debate, everyone goes home bitter. And when you go home bitter and you have to come back, you come back with, initiatives to solve problems. That's one recommendation for me. The second recommendation is that really we need to incentivize, learning. We need to incentivize learning. One of the things that we haven't done well in this part of the world is to, show the government that this really works and incentivize the government to do the right thing. And usually when I say the government, I'm not just talking about people in the federal, I'm talking about even people in the federal universities, right? So why should a lecturer really, what's the incentive for a lecturer? Why should a university invite 50 alumni to retrain and to train university students? You know what happens when alumni come back to the school to train? People become motivated, people become inspired. That's what universities like Covenant universities do, right? So imagine I have the opportunity to sit down with 500 young people today in my university, and I can bring 30 of my friends that I know that are really, really doing well, sit down with 500 of these young people and show them. I would help them avoid the mistake I made. Maybe I wouldn't have abandoned, medicine and the medical practice, because I studied physiology and I thought there was no opportunity in physiology. And today I regret it because I wish I had known. I would have stayed back in health industry and create a health startup, a mental health startup, because it's one of the biggest industries today, right? So we need an opportunity to incentivize the universities to do the right thing. So one of the major challenges today is that the universities maybe know the right things and maybe do not know the right things, but there is no incentive to want to do it. We need to, one of the things I will do if I have an opportunity is to incentivize every university that create a structure for alumni, student interaction. All these things are things that have happened, in other global economies, and we can adapt them to our local system, but we just have to create a platform for conversations. We need to incentivize, innovation in all the schools, and then, we need to fund, more. Maybe the funding conversation is not a government thing, but we can talk about that here.
I think these are fantastic points that you're making, Etayo. And I'm going to draw out one and give Mrs. O 2 minutes to reflect on it before we then launch into sort of an opportunity for others to participate in the conversation. Mrs. O, and you've spent so much time advising governments. You are familiar with the constraints of government when it comes to implementing some of the wonderful suggestions, that Etayo has brought to the table. But I also know that you're a reformer, right? And I also know that you understand the concept of leapfrogging, of disruption, and of reform. And so where really should we be going in terms of these conversations with this behemoth called government? Whether it's federal government, state government, local government, where should the conversations be going in order for us to move the needle and ensure that we are prioritizing in policy and in legislation that which we ought to be prioritizing to ensure that we're building skills for young people?
In 2 minutes. Okay. There are 2 points that I want to highlight. And I'm going to focus on these 2 points because I think if we pursue the implementation, it will shift the needle. The first is connected to the person Etayo actually mentioned, the Commissioner for Education, Lagos State, that if I can be introduced, perhaps you can be introduced. But where I'm going with that is that I've seen that, like what many of us know, we've read about it and we know it. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Unfortunately, that is truth. Like I've always said in the past, I've served at least 4 ministers and ministers of state in education. And if you have one wrong individual, all you need to have is to have that individual for 4 years, 8 years. And instead of progressing, you start unraveling the things that have been done in the past. So what that tells me is that we have to become very strategic and intentional about positioning people who know what to do in leadership positions. And we have to think about it. We have to plan it. Like how organizations in the corporate world have 10, 15 year strategic plans, 20 years. I think in education, as education reformers, we have to start positioning ourselves and planning and putting people forward and putting them in specific states, because education, responsible for educational transformation actually lies more at the state level than the federal level. So if you have more states winning and you have more states showing what should be done, it will pull other states to do the right thing. So take, for example, Mrs. Folashade Fisayo. The reason why we can even see some level of progress is because she has been trained, equipped, and prepared before she became a commissioner. She's taken her knowledge, her understanding of reform, of what needs to be done, and put in position, she's doing it. So Etayo, I don't know that you were here yesterday. She spoke about the curriculum that Lagos State has designed and is about to implement, all of us, including Modupe and I, are pretty confident that curriculum is the right thing to have in place. Am I right, Modupe?
Absolutely.
What is powerful is that it's going to be put on an app, and it's going to be, people are going to be able to, across the nation, have access to it. Why am I highlighting that? A reformer who understands the problems, has designed solutions in the past, is now put in position, you can see traction. It's the same thing you have to do from state to state. Another state to watch is Edo State. A reformer in place. She was Chairman Subeb, Chairperson Subeb. She's now Commissioner. You're fairly confident that she will know what to do. How can we escalate that and scale up? And that's one of the things I'm going to now tell you, Modupe. Could we have a strategic plan that as soon as we have an election, new legislatures come into place at the National Assembly and State Assembly, we start going to National Assembly and to the education committees, and we present to them and handhold them over a period of time, a year. Let's just use a year, and educate them, inform them, shift their thinking, work on their mindset at the national level and state assembly level, not every state, but those that are ready. And let's see whether we'll have impact. And then begin to do that for the commissioners, because the commissioners meet. There's a commissioners forum. When last, Modupe, did you address the commissioners forum? When last did any of us make an attempt to attend the commissioners forum meeting? You can demand to be invited to the table, and they will invite you. I used to attend those meetings every single month when they held them. And that's how quite a number of them were able to take them on learning journeys to see what success looks like and what a well-run educational system looks like. So the first thing is leadership. Let's pay attention. Let's not wait. Can I just say something, Modupe? Remember how in those days, when a new governor comes into place, what do? You hope and you are praying. Oh, let somebody who knows. Stop that. Let's influence by writing, by standing before the governor and saying, if you're serious about education, these are the qualities you need in your commissioner. That's one. And the second is begin to create an advocacy platform that addresses politicians as soon as they come into power. Let's get in their face and make sure that they listen to us. Not hoping that they will read, not hoping that they will come to our conferences, but we actually take ourselves, our thoughts, our ideas, and we present it to them. Those are the two things.
Absolutely brilliant. And thank you so much, Ms. O, for reminding us that we can activate our agency in the office of the citizen. And that's such a powerful concept. When we realize how much power we possess as citizens, how much we can shift the needle, we will begin to think differently and do differently. Dorothy in the comment section.
Sorry.
Yes.
Just to add, what you just said is so critical. And that's my last comment. That's my passion for the School of Politics, Policy, and Governance. Because we realize that if we don't raise, equip, train a new class of political leaders that are disruptive thinkers and values-driven, we're not going to see the shift that we're having. And we have a plan of 10,000 of them to flood the market or the nation with those disruptive thinkers. So I just wanted to end on
Fantastic. Fantastic. That certainly sounds like a step in the right direction. Dorothy says, very true, Madam Aida Otogo. There is need for a mindset shift on the new normal for communities. Gone are the times when work is office and school is the classroom. These discussions are indeed good and encouraging for creativity. Olushola says, wow, Eitayo, this is interesting, especially emanating from a man in your generation. You certainly sound much older than you are, Eitayo. You have a lot of wisdom. I also see Eugene here, great thought and drive for new technology. Unfortunately, the Minister for Education is not here. He also makes a comment about Chris Ngige needing to be at these kinds of conversations. And I think that it's this, again, it's what we're saying about creating these spaces and activating these spaces where we can have these public-private sector conversations that are very practical. I also see a comment from Emmanuel, who strongly agrees with you, Eitayo. There is so much of a gap between the government and education of African youth, particularly in our country. Education is actually expensive these days. And as a young graduate, I've had to apply to trainings and scholarships, but in most cases, I get rejected because of the influx of applicants and the need for get the best 1% out of the thousands of applicants. And so sort of leveling the playing field becomes very important so that everyone has access, not just the 1% at the top. Dr. Olu Ogunfora says there is actually a committee of vice chancellors, but there is need for better academia-industry collaboration. He puts a hyperlink in there. And I think this speaks to what Adenike Adeyemi was talking about yesterday when she referred to the Triple Helix Roundtable of the NESG. And you can read up on that on the Nigeria Economic Summit website. And Lara Euler Ajayi says, I like the idea that leaders should be strategically positioned in every state, local government for transformation and educational development. Thank you so much, Mrs. Euler Ajayi. One person wants to make a comment. Can you please unmute Mr. Kola Ayeye? I think it's a comment stroke, a question, a very quick one for Eitayo, and then each of us will have 30 seconds to make our final statements. Please do unmute Mr. Kola Ayeye because he wants to ask a comment or make a question on the link between science and employment. Mr. Ayeye, are you there?
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I'm being heard. Thanks for allowing me to get crashed into the session, and the time I've been here has been extremely useful. Just one quick comment. I came in when Mr. Eitayo was making a comment on unemployment and science. You know, I think that to the specialists, it's important for us to know what we are educating for. And what we are educating for must be related to the needs of society. I think unemployment must rank as one of the top 3 most pressing problems of the country. So for the reformers and the policy makers and the practitioners, from foundational learning up to tertiary and post-tertiary, it's important to focus on the fact that we have a huge unemployment challenge. So that's what we need to educate for. And so in the context of object of reform, I just have a quick suggestion or a quick comment. When we had 750,000 telephone lines, we've now ended up with 100 million telephone lines because the leverage of power has moved from government to the private sector. We've tried to do the same with electricity. It hasn't worked, but we're going to continue to work at it. One of the things I think you folks need to think about is education is too critical to wait for government to get its act together. If we didn't do that with telecoms and we didn't do it with electricity, I don't think we can afford to do it with education. Even if we fail at it, we need to think of reform strategies that before government knows, government just wakes up and finds that the leverage of power has moved to the private sector. Let me give an example of one missed opportunity. One missed opportunity in tertiary education was the issuance of licenses. Licenses didn't need to be issued the way they were issued. All that was needed, in my view, was a reform arrangement where those who had funds, a threshold of significant amount of funds could have been set, and compelling them to then go into trusts in arrangements with universities. So a lot of the money that has gone into private private universities, quite a bit of it, could have been frameworks where there were alliances with public universities to take our public universities back to where they were at. And if people are going to say, for example, I'm just throwing figures. If government was going to say, if people put 50 billion together, that's the kind of trust that UNILAG needs. And then that your trust will have an alliance with UNILAG. Then you can't put 50 billion on the table and not have a say. And And by the time you are saying there is 50 billion, and you are saying the interest on 50 billion is 5 billion, and that 1 or 2 billion out of it will be in salaries for lecturers, you'll be surprised that it's the lecturers that will start pushing for the reform. So I don't know the details, but I want to appeal to you. Students and education is more important than telephones. It's more important than electricity. The reason why those things are being managed by private sector is that painfully, we've seen that government in Nigeria and Africa is taking too long to get its act together. If we didn't wait for telecoms, if we didn't wait for electricity, we shouldn't wait for education. Now, education is much more complex. Getting it right is much more complex than technology, than telecoms and electricity. But if it makes sense, what I'm saying makes sense, and that becomes a reform objective, then we keep challenging ourselves until we find that model that will make it happen. I've extended 2 minutes, but you give me 1 more minute. Mr. Itayo, also about tracking things which work. Sometimes the trajectory of our development does not reflect our challenges. One major challenge was that when we took on the structural adjustment program, we were guinea pigs. And what happened with the structural adjustment program is that we were given a variant that totally de-emphasized science and manufacturing and production. And we have ended up in a place where the bankers look like the whiz kids. I studied accounting. I worked in a bank. In my first year in university, if banks put up applications for graduates to come and be tellers, nobody will apply. The change flipped just within 3 or 4 years of my being in university. Why? Because we had a structural adjustment program that made the bankers the whiskey. What am I saying? Where are we at now? It's great to study chemistry. Where we were at was that the trajectory of our education was that people in business and social sciences, quite a lot of them were in charge of industry. So I think, for example, MBAs shouldn't have been the popular or the needful thing here. What we needed to do was to be teaching some of the business and social science people the fundamentals of science. It's in Nigeria that usually you see an accountant being the CEO of Nestle. The guy can never have gone to class to study food technology.
We need to move, on.
Thank you very much.
I think those are incredible points. And what I'm going to do is we have just 30 seconds each because we need to be off this call around about 6 o'clock to make our closing statement. So Itayo, if you wanted to respond to that as your closing statement in 30 seconds, that would be wonderful. Oh, if you had closing statements for us, again, just in 30 seconds, yeah. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to keep the time. My biggest recommendation always is, regardless where you fall in the equation of things, technology, social sciences, core sciences, what is most important is to let the markets lead. We always, I don't want people to go study a particular course and graduate from the university and they struggle. But the reason they actually struggle is because, the essence of innovation has not been imbibed, at the university level. We need to create a system where right from school, while you're studying chemistry, you really have a clearer picture of the opportunities, in that field. And the only set of people that can do that, we need to invite industry leaders back to school, not just lecturers and academia. We need to work with the alumni network industry leaders to come to the universities and contribute and educate the cohort of students on the value. I wish someone had done that for me while I was studying medical physiology. I would have built one of the biggest, health, companies today. But I didn't know that. So it was a struggle for me to really connect the dots. And I think that's a struggle for many other young people.
I think, the good thing about the living in the 21st century is it's never over till it's over. And there's always room and opportunity to pursue your dreams and ambitions. So please don't let go of that. Mrs. O, your concluding statements.
30 seconds. I'm realizing with each passing year that an individual's mindset is so powerful and can determine their future and the future and trajectory of a nation. So I think it's time for us as educators to pay greater attention to mindset transformation. I think It is time to begin to identify what I call mindset skills. We heard a bit about them yesterday, those who did well during the pandemic and those who didn't do too well. The power of resilience, the power of adaptability, the power of collaborative thinking, patience, strategic thinking. We need to begin to identify values. We need to begin to identify what makes up mindset skills. And as a nation, we need to begin to shape what the Nigerian of our dream should look like. And the educational system needs to be shaped to deliver the outcome of what that Nigerian should look like after a mindset transformation. That's my.
I think that is a fantastic way to end this wonderful session. We do need a mindset shift. We do need to develop different types of skills, and we do need leadership. We need to be courageous enough to be able to disrupt, to be able to reform, to be able to leapfrog. And where we need to put the market forward, we need to put the market forward in the interest of the population. I want to say thank you very much, Mrs. Alero Aida Otopo, Mr. Itola Ogumala. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you for taking us into your personal stories and reflecting on those personal stories to make recommendations that are applicable at national level. Thank you so much. And thank you for the audience participation as well. Thank you all for your contributions, excellent comments. We're now going to what I think might actually be the most important session of all, and that's where we bring together all of the key points that have been made into our communique statement. It's an inclusive process, so please don't go away. I look forward to seeing you in another few minutes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mo. Thank you, Alero Aida Otobo, who we fondly call Mrs. O. And thank you very much, Eitayo, for this fireside chat that has really brought up some fire within us. It's always wonderful to listen to have conversations like this, especially when you listen to someone like Mrs. O. There is this adrenaline or enthusiasm that is always built up within you to do more, to want to do more, to want to not to go beyond speaking, but to start doing. And so also was very wonderful listening to Eitayo as well with what he has achieved as an individual with Utiva. I bet to say that the name he has given himself fits him, the tech evangelist. Like Dr. Mo has mentioned, we'll be moving on to present the communique for the Education Innovation Summit Nedis 2021. The team has worked efficiently and timely to make sure that by the last conversation which we have just had, there will be a communique to present to everyone for us to then go through and adopt it. But before we do that, we'll take a very short break so you can go relax, take a glass of water, a drink or something, eat something. We'll take a very short break, and when we come back, the Nedis team will be here to present the Nedis 2021 communique. Thank you. What?
Securing funding for your programs can be an arduous task. Getting funding organizations to recognize your work and fund your big ideas can become as simple as ABC if you have the right guidance. In our grant writing for fundraising course at the TEP Learning Academy, we break down the process for you and take you through a stepwise process of ensuring you land that funding opportunity for your change-making project. You will learn about grant writing fundamentals, starting with developing your strategy for grant writing, the elements of a great grant proposal, busting grant writing myths, framing your problem statement, crafting your goals, objectives, outcomes, your performance management plan, sustainability plan, and budgeting. We will also show you how you can learn from past proposal denials so you can avoid these pitfalls in the future. We leave you with expert tips in every module, which can change the game for your grant writing efforts. As you prepare for the new year, it is not too late to incorporate this into your learning calendar so you can get the funding you require to kickstart that project or scale that big idea. You can register for our next cohort by visiting www.teplearningacademy.com/pre-registration. You can also write to us through learningacademy@tepcenter.com and let us know how we can support you. Thank you and see you in the next class.
Here is Fatima. She is 8 years old and in primary 2. Fatima lives with her family in Wukari, Taraba State. She is unable to read, write, or even identify letters and numbers. Unfortunately, Fatima's story is not unique. She is one of millions of children in Nigeria who will grow up without learning if we do not intervene. The Education Partnership Center launched the Learn Nigeria Citizen-Led Household Assessment and Survey to ascertain the learning levels of children across Nigeria. In 2017, we assessed 49,000 children in 21,600 households across the country. The data has provided insight into the true state of things in Nigeria. Half the number of children in GSS 3 or grade 9 are unable to read at primary 2 level. We swung into action and implemented our Learn Nigeria remedial program. In just 24 days, we had halved illiteracy in children like Fatima from 71% to 34%. So we are convinced that there is hope. Through our work, children across Nigeria are emerging from the shadows of illiteracy and innumeracy. But we cannot stop until every Nigerian child has acquired the foundational literacy and numeracy skills that can position them to ascend the ladder of productivity and fulfillment. Join us in making more children and their learning a visible priority. After all, basic education is a fundamental human right. Please talk to us.
Nice.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yes, it is. I hope you can hear me. Okay, so it's been a fantastic couple of days having these conversations with you. Vivian and I have the difficult job of trying to summarize all the key messages and the highlights of this year's Nedis Education Innovation Summit. So what we're going to do is to present just a couple of the hot burning messages that have come out in the last 2 days of conversation, and also some really valuable quotable quotes. And then, but of course, rest assured that we're going to continue to compile a comprehensive communique that will be disseminated widely. So if we play the presentation, we'll start. So the first highlight we see here is from our keynote presentation. Yeah. And we see that the education challenges, or the challenges with skilling African youth, are not going to be solved by the government alone. And I think this just highlights the key message of collaboration and partnership and ownership. We all have to own the challenges. Education, skilling the African youth, and we'll get to some of these more key points, hereafter. Skilling the African youth is something that the government unfortunately are unable to do alone, because it requires all of our inputs, including our technical and professional expertise. So I'll take the next one. It says, I think this was for the first plenary session, which was teaching the skills of the future today. Very important points from this session was we must implement the push and pull side of education and skills education. I think that point was made by Dr. Tunji Adebeson from the plenary session. And really what strategies are being used by other countries in the global south to make sure that education and upskilling works. And it's not just about picking their brains and implementing those strategies, but contextualizing them to suit our climb and what works for us, identifying what works for us, and then pick learnings from what has worked for these countries. And, identifying the skills, the previous slides, yes, identifying the skills that are needed to, solve the relevant real life problems that we have in our education systems. Absolutely. And I think to add to that, Vivian, we do need to answer the question of what is our vision? What do we want to become? What do we want to be known for? As a country, as a continent, what do we want our citizenry to be known for? And the answers to those questions will lead us to the skills that we now begin to prioritize for our human capital development. I think the next session we had was the very explosive parallel session on developing a demand-driven curriculum for core skills in Nigeria. And we also, I think this message about the need for a handshake between education and industry was also emphasized in that session. And one of the key messages also was that we have a policy, that what we have, or the challenges we see in education in Africa are not a policy challenge, but a competency framework. How do we have a logical conceptual framework for executing the things that we know we need to execute in order to have a curriculum that provides skills that are demanded by industry? And so that took us to the second parallel session on the alternative pathways to skill development and economic growth in Africa. Please.
Yeah, so for this session, we spoke with Dr. Chizoba Imoka Bochoma, Mrs. Adenike Adeyemi, and we also spoke with.
It was moderated
by Onyinye Nkwocha. And so this session talks about entrepreneurship as not just a subject, but beyond the subject area for Nigerian youth. We also went back to our universities and how entrepreneurship is taught in our GS courses and, making it more of a mindset than just a subject. Exactly. So that beyond classroom work, we see this as a course area and we're paying attention to this as an alternative pathway for skills development. And also we also emphasize the importance of going back to our histories as Africans, going back to our roots, what has worked for us in the past. And it takes us to the Igbo apprenticeship system and how this system was a model for entrepreneurship in the past, and how we can use this as an opportunity to skill the African youth and recognize the importance and understand our culture and histories. Yeah.
Thank you. I think one thing to emphasize here, it says that the skilled African youth is one who recognizes and understands his or our own culture and identity, and also has the skills to be able to contribute that culture and identity to the world, to the global space. And I think that is so important to highlight. And that brings us straight into day 2 with our first keynote, which was a very animated and invigorating session. And I think the key message here is that the government has to recognize that the future of Nigeria is now dependent on youth population. I think one quote that came out during that session was, when money finishes, it is people that will remain.
Yeah.
The implication of that being, if we don't invest in people, we have a critical mass of our population growing up unskilled, underdeveloped, underutilized. We are creating a ticking time bomb, or we have indeed created a ticking time bomb for ourselves in Africa. And so if we're going to be ready for the future, the first place to start is by giving our human capital the skills that they require.
Absolutely. So that takes us to our next session on education management, then now the future, moderated by Henry Anumudu. And this session we had Dr. Abimbola, Dr. John Mugo, and Mr. Olarenwaju Ogundipe, where we talked about Nigerians, need to sit down and decide what education means to us. And that way we can, begin to think about what we want for our education system for our young people. And that would help us to, decide what education in Nigeria should be and it shouldn't be. And that way we get to work with stakeholders and collaborate to provide the solutions we want for our education system and develop the right skills that we want our youth to have to position them for the future. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think another key message that came out from that plenary was the importance of the whole conversation around monitoring and evaluation and assessment. And I think Dr. Abimbola Bano-Godere made a very important point about schools operating without a level of monitoring and evaluation. How do we take accountability, for the skills that are being developed in the schools? And that monitoring and evaluation at the school level should not be about punishment or castigation, but about support and results. So the management of education is critical, really, the way our systems function and the way that they support the core stakeholders of the system, including teachers, school owners, parents, and community members, and of course, the learners themselves. And so, I think this session, I already shared a couple of quotable quotes, but I think I have a couple more that I really like. One that struck a hammer in my head was made by Ms. Barbara Casimo during the first plenary on day one. And she said, job security is not in any one job, but in employability itself. Yeah. So it hits you right at the jugular, because it tells you that you have a responsibility to keep reskilling and upskilling yourself as an individual, and I think even as a country and a continent. So that was one exciting quotable quote. A lot of quotable quotes from Dr. Tunji Adegbeson. He highlighted the importance of skill as we discussed the conversation around education and skilling African youth, that we have a unique factor in Africa, and it's a factor of skill. We have a significant number of young people that we need to upskill in, not in the future, actually, right now. And traditional pathways, that is from primary to secondary to tertiary into the job market, may not necessarily prove effective. I think we have time for one more.
Yes.
Okay.
The one we have from Dr. Joe Arba, talked about Africa need to move from aid to trade. And that means we should, stop focusing on what we should receive, but then put our minds on what we have to offer as Nigerians, as Nigerian youth. And that way it would help us develop the right skills and position our youth for the future that we want them to, be in.
Absolutely. So please do us a favor. If you have any other key message, anything that jumped out, that really struck you very strongly from the last 2 days of conversations that we've had, please put that comment in the chat box. We'll be looking out for them. Immediately after this session, we'll go forward with developing our communique and also disseminating these key messages on social media. So please follow us at TEP Center and look out for those messages. Thank you so much. I think we're going to bring back Dr. Modupe Adifeso-Olateju, Managing Director of TEP Center at this point. Thank you so much for staying with us.
Wow, what an incredible couple of days. I just am filled with so much appreciation and thankfulness on a personal note, but also a lot of gratitude, on behalf of TEP Center, as an organization. When we decided to pivot completely to an online format, a webinar, for Nedis, we were filled with a little bit of trepidation because we didn't know how that was going to work. Nedis, for those who have, attended Nedis previously, is usually packed. It's a 2 or 3 day affair, full day from about 10 a.m. in the morning till about 5 p.m. And then we would have evening events as well. But I think that the pandemic has done something for us, and it's a principle, one of the fundamental principles of scaling up. And that is that it has helped us to whittle away at that which is important. So when you want to scale an education innovation, you have to ask yourself, what is the model that you want to scale? And that skeleton, that core, is that which you really, really want to continue to scale. Everything else will build around that. And I think that the culture of rich and open discourse, I believe that the inclusion, very inclusive approach that we have taken, I believe that being guided, by experts in the design of this program, and just being quite aggressive about capturing insights really forms the core of Nedis. And of course, we will be sharing, these insights, in the days that are coming. But let me now pause and just say thank you. And there are several people I think that it would be remiss of us not to say thank you to. First of all, special thanks go to our keynote speakers, the Honorable Commissioner for Education in Lagos State, Mrs. Folashade Adefisayo, and the distinguished Dr. Joe Abba, aka King of Boys. Thank you so much. We're so grateful because every time that we call on you, you graciously and generously make time for us. The entire staff and management of Tech Center appreciate you. Special thanks to our panelists and to our moderators. Your contributions made the summit well worth the investment of time and resources on our part, and we appreciate you for accepting our invitation and for speaking without reservation. We would also like to acknowledge the valuable input of our Nedis Advisory Committee for 2021, Mrs. Abisola Basanya, Ms. Victoria Ibiwoye, and Dr. Tunji Adebeso. Your feedback and enthusiasm for the summit and its objectives were very empowering. Our appreciation goes to a couple of people that we refer to as TEP alumni, Mr. Oyemi Oluleye, for serving as a Master of Ceremony, and Mr. Kiumi Akowajo for volunteering his time and expertise to help us to host this event. We're also very thankful to Mr. Ahmed of Faith Foundation. We're grateful to you all for your continuing and invaluable partnership. Many thanks to Studio Mainland team for their technical support with hosting, recording, and live streaming. Studio Mainland team is one of our Tech Center ventures, and we hope that we have not disappointed this time around. Tech Finance and Logistics, thank you for your boundless support. We literally could not have done this without you. And to all our volunteers, to the entirety of the Assessment and Learning Programs team who were and continue to be our rapporteurs behind the scenes, we say a massive thank you. You are all truly excellent people at TEP. Finally, I want to give a special thank you shout out to the TEP Center planning team for Nedis 21, headed by Ms. Yutibe Henshaw. Thank you so much for your dedication and consistency. Yuti is one person that has been part of every single Nedis event and has helped to plan every single Nedis event. Yuti, thank you for your dedication, thank you for your consistency, and thank you for your leadership. Deep appreciation to Mr. Fred Osheku, whom we have not seen at all because he has been buried under cables and under servers and under microphones. Mr. Fred Osheku leads our communications team, and Ostas Ahatishe, also a member of our communications team. Thank you so much for your invaluable support. Aminat Aliu, Vivian Chilaka, Ibironke Olurotimi, you have all done phenomenally well, and I just personally want to say thank you, and of course, TEP Center wants to say thank you to you as well. And to everyone who has spent their time either with us on the Zoom platform or joining us on YouTube, or who have retweeted or reposted or liked something that we have put up on social media, you are all part of the change that we seek. And we want to say thank you. And we want to give you our assurance that TEP Center will continue to do everything within its power to push for the skills agenda to be front and center when it comes to policy making and action. And on this note, I just want to say thank you again so much. It's been an absolute privilege to host you at this year's Nedis 2021. Please look out for Nedis 2022 because we're not going anywhere. God bless you all. Thank you.
I think we just end it here. Thank you very much, Dr. Mo. I think Dr. Mo has said it all. Of course, final thanks to my makeup artist that made sure that my forehead didn't shine for in the last 2 days. But thank you very much, everyone that joined us for the meeting. If you have our contact details, you have more questions, you want to make inquiries, please reach out to TEP Center. The emails and the contact details will be put in the chat box right away for any further inquiry that you may have. From the staple or this wonderful studio of the Mainland Studios, I am signing out, and I'm saying thank you very much for joining the Education Innovation Summit Nedis 2021. We'll see you at the 7th edition Nedis 2022. Have a lovely day. Goodbye.
community of education innovators working to foster learning and collaboration. Since 2016, NICE has curated experiences, learning sessions, and rapid industry expressions like the EdMeet series, which brings together actors from the education sector and several industries to foster collaboration and seek viable solutions to the myriad of challenges in the education sector. NICE has also been driving the Education Unscripted podcast, which addresses topical issues in education. TEP Center leads NICE and would like to invite you to join this fast growing community. Please click the link provided to join the NICE community and listen to the Education Unscripted podcast available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Thank you and see you in the NICE community. NICE is a platform for collaboration and engagement around the issues of education. NICE is a community of education innovators working to foster learning and collaboration. Since 2016, NICE has curated experiences, learning sessions, and rapid industry expressions like the EdMeet series, which brings together actors from the education sector and several industries to foster collaboration and seek viable solutions to the myriad of challenges in the education sector. NICE has also been driving the Education Unscripted podcast, which addresses topical issues in education. TEP Center leads NICE and would like to invite you to join this fast growing community. Please click the link provided to join the NICE community and listen to the Education Unscripted podcast available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Thank you and see you in the NICE community. NICE is a platform for collaboration and engagement around the issues of education. NICE is a community of education innovators working to foster learning and collaboration. Since 2016, NICE has curated experiences, learning sessions, and rapid industry expressions like the EdMeet series, which brings together actors from the education sector and several industries to foster collaboration and seek viable solutions to the myriad of challenges in the education sector. NICE has also been driving the Education Unscripted podcast, which addresses topical issues in education. TEP Center leads NICE and would like to invite you to join this fast growing community. Please click the link provided to join the NICE community and listen to the Education Unscripted podcast available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Thank you and see you in the NICE community. NICE is a platform for collaboration and engagement around the issues of education. NICE is a community of education innovators working to foster learning and collaboration. Since 2016, NICE has curated experiences, learning sessions, and rapid industry expressions like the EdMeet series, which brings together actors from the education sector and several industries to foster collaboration and seek viable solutions to the myriad of challenges in the education sector. NICE has also been driving the Education Unscripted podcast, which addresses topical issues in education. TEP Center leads NICE and would like to invite you to join this fast growing community. Please click the link provided to join the NICE community and listen to the Education Unscripted podcast available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Thank you and see you in the NICE community. NICE is a platform for collaboration and engagement around the issues of education. NICE is a community of education innovators working to foster learning and collaboration. Since 2016, NICE has curated experiences, learning sessions, and rapid industry expressions like the EdMeet series, which brings together actors from the education sector and several industries to foster collaboration and seek viable solutions to the myriad of challenges in the education sector. NICE has also been driving the Education Unscripted podcast, which addresses topical issues in education. TEP Center leads NICE and would like to invite you to join this fast growing community. Please click the link provided to join the NICE community and listen to the Education Unscripted podcast available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Thank you and see you in the NICE community. NICE is a platform for collaboration and engagement around the issues of education. NICE is a community of education innovators working to foster learning and collaboration. Since 2016, NICE has curated experiences, learning sessions, and rapid industry expressions like the EdMeet series, which brings together actors from the education sector and several industries to foster collaboration and seek viable solutions to the